All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Today is Monday, July 26th. It's the Waunakee Community School District Board of Education Diversity, Inclusion, Equity Committee Workshop. Okay, what we're going to do is I'm going to do a roll call. When you hear your name, please say here. Michelle Bird. Michael Brandt. Audrey Devon. Sam Kaufman here. Melanie Meister.
Here.
Monique Mobley.
Here.
Isabel Moore.
Here.
Laura Oshman. Leslie Petty.
Here.
Mike Pisani.
Sorry, I was muted here.
That's all right. Bethany Pottinger.
Here.
Tim Shell here. Christina Shufflin.
Here virtually.
Okay, is there anyone else that I did not call? Okay. Next, we're going to approve the agenda. Everyone saw the agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay. A second.
Second.
Okay.
Was that Bethany?
That was me. No.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
No.
Okay. All who approve say aye.
Aye.
All who disagree say nay. Okay, the agenda has been approved. So we have two public comments. One came via email, and you guys will be able to see that later. But we do have a one person, Greg Gantz. Do you mind coming up?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Yeah.
This one right here.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Greg Gens. I have two daughters in the Waunakee School District. I live in Southbridge. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for your efforts in identifying types of inequities that we have between schools and resources in that vein. One example that I've been told about by staff members is like Arboretum has no vice principal. And from what I understand, that's the only school that doesn't have a vice principal. So I thank you in efforts like that. I am sure that you are all aware of the national debate over concerns about committees that are described with terms like diversity, equity, inclusion, and that they can potentially be used to insidiously insert partisan political agendas. And I implore you all today to promote transparency by providing us, the citizens, with some operational definitions of what does diversity, what does equity, what does inclusion actually mean, and some operational measurements about what those goals are and how you will let us know when there's been success achieved in those goals being completed. I want to let you know, as some people have said, that this is attacking the process because we don't like the message. It's not that. It's about making sure that the message is clear, not ambiguous, and that there is transparency. There hasn't been any, there hasn't been any conversation in this committee that I know of one of your charges about looking at the Americans with Disability Act. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was one charge, and I don't know if that's even been discussed at this point. So there are charges, and then there's being actions, and that clarity would be nice to have. I want to let you know that, because things can be misinterpreted, any acts of racism by persons should be vehemently opposed. They should be addressed, and they should be vehemently rebuked. But it's imparting to anyone, staff or student, that they are a victim or an abuser classified by their skin color is only using racism in an attempt to legitimize theories like systemic racism, as described in this book, used by the school and the village in a recent learning project on page 4. I think you could certainly lend clarity to the conversation and concerns that some people do legitimately have, and show leadership by providing this type of clarity in your upcoming report. And I'd ask you to do that and think about the concept of providing clarity over or prior to consensus is really important, because how can we come together if clarity is not achieved. And I would really implore you to include those with your upcoming report. Thank you so much for your time and thank you for listening.
Okay, the next item is the equity audit. Tim?
Okay, so what I would like us to do would be if we could, Rebecca, scroll down a little bit. And if we could start by bringing up, I'll kind of point to it, but I don't want to mess up by grabbing the mouse here. If we could bring up this document and then the criteria 3, 6, and 7 notes. Just as a note to the committee and as a note to the public viewing this, I've been adding some information into my work email signature to promote disciplinary literacy and our vision of teaching and learning in the district. And they inadvertently got brought into board book. My goal in putting those into my signature was to broaden their distribution. I just didn't think they would get out there that way, but we won't be touching on those today. So if we could,
This one?
yes, go to that one first. So this is the survey to get some feedback that was sent out. So when you go to the notes, this is going to be where it's coming from. And now, Rebecca, if you could swing over to those criteria 3, 6, and 7 notes, and if we could make that a little awesome. So for everybody kind of like on that part of the committee, can you make out the finer print? Okay, we need to bump it up a little bit. Yeah, let's
For where the dots are after.
yeah, let's take it to maybe 200. There we go. See if we can get 175.
Yeah.
We have to actually enter that in.
I'm remembering the colors. Oops. I believe I also have this in my drive. That
It
might be
is,
better.
it is. Well, I mean, let's see how this works out, but, so the approach we have been using as we've gone through the equity audit is we would have a work team that would gather some information in advance, share it out with the committee, all of that information, would show up in the materials in the agenda. And then we would do kind of a pre-survey of the committee to prime the discussion. And what we've been doing is we would go through each one, kind of review where that came in. In this case, we actually did, because a lot of these were teacher perspectives, we did a teacher survey a few weeks ago. And it was summer, not everybody could respond, but we felt that might be better because we have some staff members on the committee, but the thinking was let's get more voices than just a relatively small handful of staff members on the committee. So the first item is our school has high quality facilities with heating and cooling systems, safe indoor air quality, and running water. And so you can see how this appeared, and then the subcommittee highlighted the most common one, which for this first one was the blue, which is the top end, the Flourishing. And where there were staff comments on the survey that we thought were, interesting, that was brought in. We have one asbestos and heritage. Heritage, as you may remember, is our oldest facility. There have been several rounds of asbestos abatement. There is no friable or airborne asbestos at Heritage, but buried within the building, sealed off, we still have some precedent. And the heritage complex is unique compared to our other complexes because of the age of the building. So that's where that comment is coming from. So I guess if we could look at this, we had 61% in the Flourishing. We had 32% in the next highest, Improving, and then the third highest was Emerging, and then we had nothing in the two lower categories for the NA. So any questions on this item from the group, or any discussion on this item?
Yeah, I just have a question. So obviously with COVID, I know that the air system values went up. But before that, what was like that? Was it at the same level in terms of like air purification? 'Cause I know they have like water fountain, actually some of it, yeah, water fountain.
Yeah.
You know, filter and stuff.
So, I mean, one characteristic of our school facilities is, the community's been very, because of our growth and because of the support of the community, we have had many facilities referendums over the last few decades. In some cases, it's new school construction, but even where we've had existing school facilities, all of the core infrastructure, including the heating and ventilation systems, have been renovated. So, prior to the pandemic, everything was at a very contemporary standard for air handling. What changed with the pandemic were two things. One, it accelerated for water, where we put in bottle fillers versus traditional bubblers or fountains. And in addition to the existing HVAC, which was already a contemporary standard, we did add these bipolar ionization units, which in principle are supposed to address microbes in the air handling chambers as the air circulates. So that was really, there's really those units more than any other significant upgrades to the HVAC.
So I can tell you that the water bottle fillers in the high school, that's been one positive from everyone.
And that's true in all of our schools and all of our sites. Yes. So, any other questions?
I guess I would just make a really brief comment about the issue of that. I mean, I'm glad that that was something the board did last year in terms of doing the air upgrades and everything like that. I mean, John Kramer, the facilities director, had all that information because someone had complained previously about air quality and heritage. So we actually looked into certain things, and then COVID happens, and there you go. Now we've got a solution, and there's enough money lying around that we're able to do it almost right away. But it bears repeating it. It would also be interesting to know how different staff in different buildings actually answered this survey. Because, for example, Arboretum has had air treatment since I think it was built that no other building has. They have some sort of UV system for a long time. No one else had that either. And I noticed the difference when I went to Arboretum to see my kids there. And I have asthma when I go into Heritage and feel completely different. So it'd be great to know if the staff actually felt different. At least we've got something that lets know that it's the same across all.
And I imagine the same thing is probably the same for the intermediate school, because that's a fairly new building as well. As it's for here.
I just have one really quick comment. I think it really varies from building to building. I think if you were to ask the two middle school teachers who have to teach outside in the, I don't know what we call them, the outdoor, like whatever classrooms, I would wonder if their heating and cooling feels quite the same as being inside a building. So, I mean, I know those are all improvements that we're making and some are out of our control, but I do think it will vary from building to building drastically.
And Go ahead.
So I'm sorry, I just can't see, what is the percentage? I know it says flourishing, but I can't read those.
Flourishing is 61%. Improving is 32.5%.
And for those of you who aren't familiar, behind the middle school, so on the west side of the middle school, prior to this year, for the last few years, we've had a modular unit that contained 2 classrooms. And due to increasing enrollment moving up into the middle school beginning this year, we're in the process of installing a second modular unit, so that's an additional 2 classrooms. So those buildings are connected in for electricity, internet, all of our safety alarms and things like that. But I should say obviously, because I should clarify, the modular units aren't on the air handling that is in the main middle school premises. So, when I say all buildings are the contemporary standard, the modular classrooms are certainly the code, but their modular classrooms is not the primary concern. And we will have 4 classrooms out there this year. Well, normally we would operate with no modulars. Modular classrooms are typically what you see in districts as they're growing before they reach the point where they're able to authorize additional construction. And so we were at 2 classrooms, but this year we need to move up to 4 because again, we've got some larger classes. So, any other questions? So what we've done in the past is we've started with the most prevalent one, because we felt these were ones we wanted staff perspective on. We would start with that and see if, flourishing was kind of where our committee's consensus was, or whether there was interest around the table of moving it one direction or the other. Now, flourishing is a top category, so the question I think is more, does the committee want to keep it at flourishing, or does the committee want to talk about improving, which is where about 1/3 of the respondents went?
I mean, I think improving, it seems like we're getting feedback. So before it should be, it's like you have your stuff like 100%, doing great. Not saying that, it's not getting towards that, but I think if there's any more ability to grow.
I would agree, because, flourishing is exceeds compliance, and it sounds like we're at compliance in some buildings, but are we exceeding it at the middle school? Are we exceeding it at Heritage? I don't think that sounds accurate. So I would agree that improving sounds like a more comfortable place to be.
Okay, so I think what we'll do is we will do it around the table. And we'll actually start, just so Christy and Mike know, we're going to start with you on the Zoom as our first voters. So get those unmutes ready and ask you, you're going to vote for flourishing, which is the highest, or improving, which is the second highest. So it's flourishing or improving. And Mike, we'll start off with you.
I'm going to say improving.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Christy.
Improving.
Thank you, Christy. Michelle?
Also improving as well. I also agree with improving. Yeah.
Improving.
Improving.
I'll be the fly in the mud. I'll say flourishing. That's fine.
And I'll go with improving as well. So,
See, this is what I love about going through this process. I think we have top schools, and if we're honestly comparing us to other schools, we probably say, yeah, we're flourishing. But then I think we're really being very critical here, and I love that, the fact that we're not grading ourselves higher than we should be grading ourselves. So
That's the only reason I said flourishing too, because it's like my sister teaches at Lowell in medicine, and it's one of those schools that has no air conditioning. So right now it's you can't go in it, but they've installed some things that are improving it. So she would say improving about a school that doesn't have air conditioning and can't even be in half the year. I had no trouble saying improving when it seems such a relative. But Michelle, you put it perfectly.
Mhm.
That's right.
And I think for the record, it was our 2001 summer construction that finally brought school-wide air conditioning to all of our sites. And we've maintained that standard since.
Oh, you mean there was no AC?
Prior to 2000, well, that would be for many schools in the upper Midwest. It would be common prior to the 1990s in the upper Midwest, it'd be more common to have unair conditioned school facilities with air conditioning units in areas that would be occupied more in the summer and where you might have some more vulnerability. So the main office and wherever the health office would be in the building. But standards have changed since, the late 80s or 90s. Rebecca, if we could move up to B. Our school provides clear goals and support for the work of our educators, including planning time, collaborative time with fellow educators, and access to professional publications, research, and technology. And this was a little more mixed than the previous one. The most frequent response at 53% from the staff survey was improving. And then it was a little more divided. 24%, almost 25% were at the highest rating, flourishing. 18% were at emerging, which is the third highest. Not apparent was that thin yellow slice, which doesn't have a breakout number, but I'm guessing was around 4%. And then we do have some comments, and the two comments were one, prep time is in, so it says here, prep time's in policy. It's actually, teachers do have prep time under the handbook, which has the effective policy. And then there's common prep time that schools strive to provide, but this respondent noted that from their perspective, prep time is being eroded by other things. Special educators, had challenges getting their breaks. This person reported even some lunch challenges because their para positions that would provide supervision were not always filled. And then the second comment was we need more time, and our students at the high school need more time to process what they are learning. Wednesday saved us. I'm guessing that's an allusion to the asynchronous Wednesdays. We need to incorporate flex time for students and teachers to better address the weaknesses and strengths of each learner. So there are a lot of pieces in this indicator. There's the clear goals and support for the work of our educators, and then the audit template writers had some stems to describe it: planning time, collaborative time, and then access to professional publications, research, and technology. So the comments were they were in terms of time, but the responses were to the full prompt. So questions and comments.
Well, I guess if you're an educator, you would know that this happens or doesn't happen. Coming as a community member and looking at that, I think it was hard for me to say yes, because I don't know. So I think it would be, it's just unknown, obviously. In terms of your goals, like you said, support for our educators. It seems like that's what the school district does, but I don't know 100%. So I guess it'd be nice. And I think the comments helped just to kind of get a little bit more of that feedback too, because it seems like half, if you look at the pie, half of the people.
Yes, the second.
Yeah. So that additional information would help me to see that, because unless you're an educator, you're not going to see that.
Yeah, that first comment is actually mine from taking the survey. I had a lot of, my job as a psychologist, I'm in both special education and regular education. And I had a lot of special educators in my office, very upset. They were stressed. They weren't getting their breaks, and And yeah, I think it's, for me, it seems like it's written down, like you said, Tim, probably in a handbook versus policy. But there seem to be certain positions that it's not honored as consistently maybe. And sometimes that's on the educator as well as sometimes it's on the administrator, you know. We have some educators that are passionate and they don't want to let some things go. Or there's a certain student that they have a bond with, so they kind of take on those crisis calls during their prep. So it erodes for a variety of reasons, but it's certainly, I think people feel pressure to use that time and just not have any downtime during the day. That's just my perspective.
I would second that. I think we call it death by a thousand cuts. You know, it's not just one thing that erodes into that time from the teachers that I see and the other paras that I see around, and even administrators. You might have that block, but it just gets filled by all kinds of little things that just need to get done. Emails that need to be responded to, a student who comes into a classroom. Sometimes you need to take a chill, you know, and it's just, it's hard to do during that time.
I guess my question would be, do you feel both of you like the support from administration? Like, are you getting the support from your administration to try to figure that out?
Yes, and I think that gets into the unfilled para positions, though. That is out of administrators' control, that we're not having people apply for those positions or they're hired and then they leave early. You know, there's a variety of things there that are out of control for people in the district. No, I ponder about how much are we offering paraprofessional, like hourly pay versus some other local districts? Is it more competitive? Is it the fact that we don't have very many full-time para positions? Those are some of the wonderings I have. I don't know the answer to them.
I'd say all the above, and you answered them for me, so I don't have to be as smart as
So an observation I will make, and as I think about this, I think it does have a light to kind of shine on our discussions as a committee here, is that, and I'll make the contrast between, Monique and Bethany here. Bethany as an elementary teacher, now what happens during your prep time, Monique pointed, there are a lot of demands on that time, but for Bethany and for many teachers, prep time exists because the students are scheduled on the master schedule to be with another teacher for a subject. So when Bethany's students are at music or art or physical education, elementary world language, they have someplace they're scheduled to be, and that frees up not only Bethany, but her entire grade level. We try to free them up at the same time so they can collaborate if they choose to. However, there are other educators whose students, and this would be typically students with disabilities and also to a degree English learners, where the prep time for those teachers sometimes can come through the master schedule, but it's sometimes dependent on other supervisory staffing, like the paraeducators. And so it's not as automatic in the structures as it would be for the majority of our teachers. It means these other positions have to be fully staffed to have it be as readily available. And it's due to the specialized nature of those positions. And of course, those positions are specialized because they're supporting our students who have unique needs that need to be met. So, as we think about, the equity lens and our students who come in with different languages or our students who come in with disabilities, there is a variant. Other questions?
As an educator, I wasn't sure about the access to professional publications, research, and technology, because I actually access it through my UW students, and I wasn't sure. I was like, well, maybe I'm missing it. Do I have access to like peer-reviewed articles on school psychology? Like, do you know the answer to that? I don't know.
I've got a partial answer.
Okay.
My my go-to answer is talk to your school's library media specialist.
Okay.
But I mean, the library media specialist, and I say that because they're not only responsible for maintaining the student collection. There is a professional library for each school. Now, historically, those would be texts or journal subscriptions, but today, a lot of that would be through electronic subscription. So, staff members' resource pales in comparison to what you would get from a university, but there are options. And if there is something you would really like that we don't have, and it's feasible in the budget, that would be a conversation with the library media specialist, and they could potentially look at it. That's who you'd want to go to. So we've talked a lot about time, but for the educators as a group, other thoughts on the survey results from the perspective of clear goals?
I would say, as someone who has my schedule broken up where this is my prep time because my kids are in other places, it is really helpful to have that prep time that is the same as the rest of my grade level colleagues, so that we can get together and have common planning time. But I know that the expectations for that are different at different schools, depending on who your principal is. You might be having 1 day a week where you're having a professional learning community meeting. You might have 2 days a week. And anytime that your administrator is asking you to do something during that prep time, there's something else that you would be doing during that prep time that you're now doing during your personal time. And so I think it's really important to have that common planning time so that we can do those things together that we need to do together. But I think that there are some situations where teachers might feel like I'm being asked to do these other things that are taking me away from the things that I need to do for my students. And so I think that that can be different at different schools and maybe for different grade levels.
So the predominant response was improving. The next 2 were the one above, which was flourishing, and the one below, which was emerging. So I think what we'll do, if people are ready, if we're not, just say so we can extend it, is we will do what we did before. And you, in this case, you can vote for one of the 3. That seems to kind of be the band. And we'll go back out to our Zoom participants, and Mike, we'll start with you again, and then we'll go to Christy, and then we'll go to Michelle and around the table. So Mike, how do you vote?
I would say improving.
Thank you, Mike.
Mhm.
Christy?
I would also say improving, and as a school social worker, I feel really supported to access professional publications and research. But as a cohort, we've pushed for that, and it's part of our contract too. So I feel very good about that, especially compared to other districts.
Improving.
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 I'd say immersion.
Improving.
I'll say emerging.
I would say emerging.
I would say improving. So I think that left us with about 2/3, 3/4 in favor of. Does that sound right, Rebecca? Okay. Let's move along to the next one. C, students at our school have access to services. Have access to services that support their social, emotional, and physical well-being through favorable students to SISP ratios, school policies, and the allocation of resources. And I believe SISP refers to pupil services staff. They have it as specialized instructional support personnel, but I think locally we would call it pupil services or student services. And so here, voting broke out between the second highest and third highest category. So on the staff survey, the leader was 44% for emerging. That was the third highest, followed by 39% for improving, which is the second highest. And then we had almost 8% for flourishing and 9% for not apparent. And the comment in here was our student services ratios are not at the recommended limits. Also because of some of the district approved evidence-based interventions, we have now put a cap on the number of students served with interventionists, which limits student access for kids who would technically meet the criteria for intensive intervention. Discussion and questions.
So I guess my first question would be, how would you know where to find this information? So just say your kid's not getting services. So how would another parent know how to be able to provide that? Do you have to go to that specific person to find that out? Or is it under like policies, those type of things? And kind of that way. So I think for me, I would just want more information on like how everybody can access services.
So, yeah, that's a great question. So some of our schools have to do this because they're under Title I. But in practice, all of our schools would follow this format because the Title I requirements are kind of a practical approach, which is.
You just explained what Title I.
Okay, that's right. So Title I is part of the federal legislation, the main federal law outside of the Student Disabilities Act that shapes the federal role in education. So Title I is one of the chapters of the law that provides funding for states and school districts to provide additional services to students who are academically at risk or are homeless. And so I think I'm going to ask, no, would this have to be your comment?
It did, yeah, it is.
Okay, so actually,
I'm so busted.
no, I
I'm
could
just
just, would you like to kind of from your perspective as a school psychologist speak to kind of the intervention?
Well, and also with this limit thing, what are these recommended
so,
limits?
That's based off of like national associations recommendations. So just speaking for like NASP, which is the National Association of School Psychologists, they recommend about a 1 to 750 be the max. And for example, I'm at about 1 to 1100. So I'm the most out of whack of all the ratios of the school psychs. We've actually just remedied the other people, so we're getting closer. Christy, I don't know if you know where we're at social worker wise, but I believe your national association says 1 to 500. I don't know how we're doing with that. I know we definitely are grateful to have the social workers we have. And then counselors, I believe, are 1 to 250. And so if I think about like Heritage, for example, we're right at 500 or just about
Right about
over, I think.
500, yeah.
So we have 1 school counselor. So technically we would be, to meet the national recommendations, it would be 2 for that building. So in comparison to other local districts, our ratios are strong. Compared to what's recommended nationally, they're still a little bit out of sorts. There's a national school psych shortage, for example, like they can't have enough graduate students to fill all the positions in the whole country. So it is what it is. And then I personally, when I answered this question, when I read the acronym for the SISP, I thought about our reading interventionists, our math interventionists as well. And again, this I can speak for Heritage, for example, we're remedying that as well by adding 1.5 to that building. Prior to that addition, there were certainly kids that were below a certain percentile on their test scores that we kind of screened kids at. That we could place in a tier 2 intervention, meaning they were being serviced by another educator in the building, like another classroom teacher, versus like our interventionist. Whereas like Arboretum, for example, we can serve more than the kids that qualify for tier 3 we don't have as many kids that are meeting that threshold, that database threshold that we've kind of established as a district through our multi-tiered system of supports handbook. That's my perspective.
And so and thank you for that, Mel. So the concept is when you have more students who are within the benchmark to qualify for additional academic support, but your interventionists don't have enough time in the day to pick them up, your options would be to run larger groups, larger than the research for the intervention was ever tested for, or you rank your students in order of need and you schedule based on your ranking the neediest students, and you have other students who are at risk, but they're, as you rank your students, they're not at the top of your list, and they may not get served.
So does like cost come in, which are you start talking about budget, about hiring? Did you say like there was one school counselor, there's supposed to be one, two?
Yeah, according to their national association.
And for the interventionists, similarly, so an interventionist would be somebody who is here and their role is not to teach in the classroom with 20-some students like Bethany. Their job is simply to work on basically student support tutorials in maybe reading or mathematics, depending on what their specialty is. They only work with small groups of students, and in some cases where the need is intense, maybe even on a one-to-one basis.
And I will say again, another thing we're lucky about in this district is our instructional coaches, where, if there are so many kids that qualify for intervention, it might be like something with our core instruction or the instruction we're delivering to all students, and that person can kind of come in and do some coaching within the classroom to meet the needs of the whole class better. So, it's not all about the interventionists. We are lucky to have some other positions that can support those efforts. But again, the school psych shortage, for example, like some of it's in our control, but some of it is out of our control. There's not enough people wanting to be school psychologists in this nation. So.
And I think it's, like you said, Mel, our ratios for some of these student services positions are below what the professional association would recommend. Within Dane County, we compare favorably. To bring the whole county up to the association recommendations would require a very different available pool of specialists than currently exists. So this is, we're putting a local face on this, but as Melanie said, this is a bigger issue. Not that it doesn't, not there aren't things we can do locally, but it's a wider problem.
I also put Immersion on this when I did it, the survey, and I was thinking in our discussion here, moving on that to the social emotional part of that question. I'm thinking about just some of the affinity groups at our school. Those are coming from students wanting to find a place to fit, and they always was maybe not always something there for them. And I wrote down just on my sheet here, like our LGBTQ community, our Black community, our Latinx community, our Above the Influence club, which is helping kids not get into drugs, and having a positive outlook on life, and our Justice League also. Those are places that sometimes students don't know where they fit in, and they start with clubs, and that's another thing that goes back to teachers talking about fitting into your prepping time and your planning time. You're thinking about what are we going to do with our students in the clubs. There's many more. At the high school, we have over 100 clubs. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. And these kids are looking for some kind of social emotional support, not just through their classwork and through the interventions that might be needed, but also from just finding out what is their place in the world and connecting with other people, and then connecting with teachers. A lot of these clubs start because the students ask for it. We're not out there going, oh, let's start this club. The students needed that club. Sonia Doris is one of the clubs that started, and Christy was part of that. It started because students came to us. The BSU started because students went to some of the teachers at the high school. We're not looking for it. It's the students who are coming to us, and we're trying to fill that need. And we volunteer our time. by the way.
I just want to thank you because I wasn't even looking for that lens.
Yeah.
I was looking through a different lens when we started talking about that. That makes complete sense, what you said, because there's a lot of students who are going through those issues.
Identity issues.
Identity, not just identity, but so many other things, and we do have to be aware. But then I also hear, when you were saying that they were teachers, you're already strapped, right? So, and you're thin. So it's just like, how do we shorten that gap or provide those supports to be able to do that?
And I will say that administration, I don't believe they've ever turned a club away. And I've never heard of a student say, I wanted to do something, and it didn't happen. Don't quote me on that, but I've never heard a student say somebody didn't come and help them when I asked for them.
But the thing I would take further is, okay, starting the club is great, but again, it's that support around, it, right? Because I'll say, you're here, right? So, like, the club is great, but again, I'm assuming you need staff, you need people supporting that group. Is that correct? Or
I can kind of talk about it because I'm in 3 of the clubs that she just named, or I was in 3 of the clubs. But like with BSU, like Mr. Mercury's leaving now and Mr. Wheeler, so it's like that club is kind of, plus two, COVID ruined a lot of clubs. That's another thing. COVID just ruined everything. But that club is slowly going away because we don't have a teacher for it, or not enough Black students that want to come and join it, or about the influence. A lot of students just think like, oh, that's just like a no joke club, but like it's more than just that. It's like about having the students and also having a teacher. And with like the whole like social work or like having a whole teacher guidance counselor, I'm sorry, I haven't talked to my guidance counselor, or when I was in high school, I haven't talked to my guidance counselor since freshman year. I don't talk to any guidance counselor at all because they don't help me. No, like in high school, in my perspective, all they care about is either the kids who are struggling or the really smart kids. And whenever I had an issue, I went to one of my teachers that I was in the club with, because those are the ones that helped me through all my life and just letting me like just rant to them. So like with that, like again, like I give teachers so much credit, and like yeah, that's what I just have to say on that.
And in other, just like with the clubs, I'm thinking, and I know those are often they're teacher led and helped. In other places, is there community members helping out or parents helping out in clubs in other schools? Just curious, like, we have this whole community that could be helping with these clubs and building them up, and they don't even probably know about it,
And I think you hit on a point right there, is that we're speaking a lot about high school level
Yeah.
clubs.
Yeah.
What about our younger students? We don't
That's right.
really, like at our elementary level, there's like Girls on the Run. That's led by a community member, a family member, I think.
I can see about that too.
Yeah.
In middle school, there's a Justice League club. Justice League is pretty much it's just a club that we like made to just talk about like, issues that are happening. So we made one in middle school when I was around, and then a year later, it actually ended up getting got rid of it because a parent complained about how it took too much time out of their kid's schedule. So in middle school, they actually used to have a club, but a parent complained about it. So now there is no Justice League that a kid can go to. I know, like, I think there's a dance team, like other teams, but I think they're LGBTQ plus community just not made there. But like, out of all those clubs, like, there's no that.
So a big part of running schools is actually the plan. It's the schedule, it's time. And because student organizations have always been associated with high schools first, I think when you look at high schools, it's the case with ours, it's the case with most high schools, they'll have some kind of time built in, maybe as part of the regular schedule, or maybe there's special schedules over on some days of the year to create time for clubs and organizations to meet. That's a regular feature in American high schools, including ours. But below high school, middle school, you often will see student organizations running on a more limited access to time. So I mean, I think when we look at organizations, the first thing is you need student interest. Then you need an adult advisor. And I think, you know, it would probably be fair to characterize the way schools, we think about it. We're always interested in having an on-staff advisor first, partly for communication and also partly because, you know, communication with kids because they know the person's in the building all the time. But we do have community members, whether it's in athletics, we have some clubs that have parents, we have some retired staff persons who continue to advise clubs. But then the last thing you need to really make a club work at a high level is you, in addition to the student interest and an advisor, you need to have time. And there's no question at the high school that time is more present than below high school. I think, you know, and when it's not present, then there's always going to be questions about how can that time best be used. And, you know, so I thank you for kind of highlighting where the middle school is on this.
Even with the high school, like speaking of time, like we only have like that little, like we only have 30 minutes for each club, and it's just like at every single other meeting, we're always like, I wish we had more time. I wish we had that. It's just like so sad, like or like can't be after school because like football and lacrosse and all that. Like it just sucks that time is like at the high school at least and middle school.
So does
Christy would like to speak.
I think I just want to share a little perspective about the structure. And I love that Monique brought this up because when Soñadores first started, the only way that we actually were able to make it work was through contact time, which was, and at the time, this was new to the high school because we didn't have that. This is what, 6-7 years ago. Because what we found is a lot of kids to be involved couldn't come after school, couldn't come before school because of transportation or working or all kinds of, you know, family commitments, childcare for younger siblings. And the reason and the success for Soñadores that we've grown the group and it's become so strong and it's what, year 6 or 7 now, is partly because of that structure. And I also worked for a year at the middle school and worked on getting the GSA started there. And Ty Jury and I had to do all our meetings over lunches, which was really challenging for kids and also us as staff members, because usually we're trying to like supervise lunch or help out. So I want to just think a little bit about our structures and the barriers and kind of stepping back and thinking about how we do support kids through those different access points. And one other piece to this, I also feel like we are at a major changing, like actually quite an exciting time because we've been doing a lot of data collection through student services on mental health issues and advocating for different services and positions. And I know Chris Mand and Kurt Ely, our student services directors, really pushed a lot of these issues this year. And I feel like next year we've got a lot of new staff coming on board, and then also some collaboration with outside community organizations for mental health. And part of those were really due to student services saying, wow, there's so much more here. And we really need to look at our students who aren't necessarily like the high kids who are like really on our radar, and the kids, you know, there's like this in-between group of students who may not have access to or the support that we see kind of fall through the cracks. So those are two totally different points, but I do feel like in this district, there's a lot of movement and recognition for some of the social emotional needs in what we all know is a very high pressure district to do well academically. So those are just two different things, structural and also mental health support, seeing some really positive changes. So I'll stop.
So on the faculty survey, we did have a little bit of not apparent and a little bit of flourishing, but unless anybody really wants us to vote on more, most of the votes were either for emerging or improving. So I think when we go around, we'll just kind of stick to those two choices, unless somebody wants to add a third choice into the mix. Okay. So as we go around, it'll be between improving, which is the second from the top, and emerging, which is the third from the top. And we'll go the order we've been proceeding in. So Mike.
Emerging.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Christie,
Emerging.
thank you, Christie.
This is with emerging as well.
Same here, immersion.
Emerging.
Emerging.
Immersion.
Emerging. Thank you, everybody. I can record that, and then we'll go up to D1. Our school ensures those who work closest with students have the authority to make decisions about their work. And the consensus from the staff survey was in improving. That was 48% of the respondents. Second high, and so that is the second from the highest criteria. The next most responded was emerging at 26%, followed by flourishing at 15.6%, and not apparent at 10.4%. And there were no comments that really added additional information to this one. So open it up for questions and discussion.
Yeah, so my question would be, when you talk about authority to make decisions about what?
Yeah, this is kind of weird. Like,
Yeah.
is it
I
like
know
there's
what that
school,
meant.
so is there places like where like the teacher won't be able to make a decision about like the kids' work, or is that they're saying the grades that they're getting, and someone higher up saying, no, they can't have that. I was kind of confused too.
I could talk a little bit about that from our EL students. I'm a paraeducator, not a teacher, but both Elena, the teacher I work with at the high school, who's the EL teacher, and the teachers that I work with in the support capacity. For instance, maybe there's an assignment a student needs to do, and it's just too complex, given their language level, and there's a rubric that is used. And so then we'll just go back to the teacher, usually comes from us, and many times the teacher also has already have modifications for projects. This is not just for EL students. Special ed would probably fall under this too. And that we've had very good relations working with teachers to say, hey, you know, how about if, you know, Jane does this, and this, it meets the spirit of what you're doing, and, you know, given their reading, writing, listening, and speaking skills, this would be an appropriate work for what they're going to do. We've really had little problems with that. The same thing with tests. Sometimes we modify tests, we simplify the language on the test, we might take some questions off the test, given, you know, the level of complexity of the test. And we do this in sciences, in the English classes, if you maybe need to write an essay on a book. We might even give an alternative book selection that might have the same themes that are involved with there. Math is a little tricky because math is just so, you know, got to do step one before you can get to step two. I would say we struggle the most with math. But in most of the other classes, from our perspective at the high school, we've done pretty well. There's definitely room for improvement. It often comes from the EL team going to the teacher, not necessarily the teacher saying, oh, here's all this modified work. So it's a conversation that has been relatively successful. If at times a little frustrating for both to get an understanding of where the student is and what is a reasonable expectation.
Now, is that just students who have diagnoses or special education? Or is that
Well, I'm
any
not
student?
speaking for special education, I'm speaking for English language learning students. And they do take a yearly test called Axis, which gives it's a national test of where they rank between 1 and 5 on listening, reading, writing, and speaking in English. All students take that test. And that gives the teacher, the EL teacher and the classroom teacher an idea of what's a good fit.
I can say that it just in the classroom in general, that I'm able to make decisions about like if I feel like the class in general needs to spend a little more time on a certain skill that's tricky, we can spend a little more time on it. Or if I feel like I have this group that's struggling, I can take a day where we do centers or something, and then I'm working with this group on this and this group on that. So I feel like there is that flexibility for teachers to make decisions about what the kids that they're with need. that is balanced with having fidelity to the curricular resources that we are using. And so that can be tricky at times, I think, depending on the administrator, or like especially during this last year, like we had to teach this thing on this day because everybody in the district at that grade level was all kind of in lockstep to ensure that if somebody was going virtual or coming back from virtual, we'd all be in the same place. But I think that in general, we're finding the balance between teachers being able to just do what they see their kids need, and also do what the school district has agreed is the right thing to do in the curriculum.
And to build on what Bethany shared, while in normal times we might have some guidelines for teacher teams about kind of the pace that you go through a course or a resource, because we want to make sure that all of it's covered by the end of the year. As Bethany said, we provide teacher teams with flexibility in how they schedule that process. We had to get a little tighter on some things during the pandemic, with the expectation that it'd be similar, but I do think at the elementary level, we were having meetings across all 3 grade level teams to help make those decisions. And at the high school, a lot of students in a year-long course may change sections or even teachers at semester. So at the high school for year-long courses, it's been important for teachers to be in communication so there's no gap. But in general, that's a teacher team, grade level team, course team decision. There are many districts, often larger districts in the country, where there will be a pacing guide that will come down. And if it is October 23rd, this is the lesson that should be happening in every first grade classroom. That's not something that happens here. The other thing is that while if Bethany's principal wanted to see her lesson plan, Bethany would provide her principal with her lesson plan. But there are districts in the country where teachers have to submit their lesson plans on a weekly basis to be reviewed by the principal. So, we have a system of delegated professional responsibility in the district. And I think that's one reason why you see the improving there.
I think if you're wondering why it might not be flourishing, I think there's kind of a debate about the role of teacher agency. So like we have really good curricular resources that we've agreed upon, and teachers have the ability to pilot those programs before they're decided on. But then once that program is decided on, there's not as much flexibility. Like for example, we have a reading comprehension curriculum that also provides vocabulary words. And so I need to make sure that I read that book to my kids and do those lessons and teach those vocabulary words. And so you could argue, well, but if a teacher knows their class, then maybe they know a book that would suit their class or be more interesting to their class. Maybe there are other vocabulary words, and time is pretty tight. So there might not be time to do what is part of the curriculum and this additional thing that the kids might like. I think that's a debate in education in general. Finding that balance between school districts providing the guidelines where like this is best practices in teaching versus teachers just having the agency to say, here's what I think is best for these kids who are in front of me right now.
So I think, as we talk about the debate, people start talking about other things that are implemented in classrooms. A lot of people just think the teachers can just say and do whatever they want to do if they're not following this. I'm not saying everybody says that, but it just seems like they have some time to just be like, today we're talking about A instead of C. So it's
It's probably something that's different from when we were kids. I think that there's a lot more that's more standard now.
Yeah, it is.
Well, and it's probably definitely varying from the grade school level through middle school and high school as well, with that leeway of what you can do in the classroom. Or if you have time to do it.
So, on D1, the leader was improving. The second position was emerging. And then flourishing was quite a bit below. So this is probably, unless somebody really wants to put in a point for flourishing, this is probably between improving and emerging. So we'll start as we did. Mike, when you're ready to vote, come off mute.
Excuse me, sorry, I would say emerging. And one question, and I'm sorry if you addressed it and I missed it earlier on. Do we know how many staff took the survey? I know you said it wasn't great, or somebody said the turnout wasn't great. Do we have a total number?
77 on this side.
Gotcha. And how many teachers in Waunakee?
This would be about a little over a 25%. No, wait, little over a 20% response rate.
Gotcha. And teachers and support staff, or just teachers did it go to?
I think this just went to teachers.
No.
Okay. And sorry.
So I think it went to teachers and pupil services staff. I don't think it went to the parents.
Gotcha.
I don't think
Sorry
I
if all
saw
that
it.
was answered.
Maybe it depended on what email listserv, Christy. I don't know.
Yeah. Did you get it, Mel?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Mike, did you do your vote? You did.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go with emerging also.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you.
I'll say improving.
Yeah, I'm gonna say improving, and Bethany, you really helped me with the clarification. I really helped that, because it is based on the confines, the limitations, and how the standards are, set forth for these educators. So I think that there's still room for growth, but I think improving.
Improving as well.
Improving.
We'll say emerging just because of what you just said. I mean, if you listen to the percentage, survey. Just because of that, I'd like to hear more.
I'll go with improving. What did our count out?
It's 3 emerging, and let's see, we have 12 people here, so.
D2, our school honors all educators through authentic incorporation of educator voice in decision making. And so the difference, they're related, that's why it's D1 and D2, but D1 is more like teacher autonomy over the work that teachers are doing directly. D2 is about the role of educators in having a voice in larger decision making, school level, and so on. And so here we had a few different aspects. So the leading vote getter was emerging at 39%, followed fairly closely by improving at 32.5%. Not apparent at 16.9%, flourishing at 7.8%, and does not exist with, let's see, 39, 71 and a half. Probably a 3 or 4% slice there for does not exist. And staff survey comment, a lot of lip service is paid to cultural competence and educator input, but it does not happen. The pandemic was a prime example of teachers having opportunity to speak, but they are never heard or considered. Admin holds all the cards, makes all the decisions, and rarely puts into practice or shows. I think there's a little more there that respect for staff ideas. Some districts included teachers in planning and problem solving at much more positive outcomes. So disheartening. to not be respected as a stakeholder and problem solving in education. Then the second one is teacher voice was difficult to hear this year under the circumstances. We felt unheard when it came to equity and the difficulties imposed on students who chose virtual learning. So, comments to share off the survey. With that, we'll open it up for questions and discussion.
I mean, does anybody else echo that? I guess for me, I don't know much about this, but the staff comment really just like hits me. Obviously, there can be one person saying that, but is that like a consensus in school?
I could give voice to that. I mean, those were not my comments, but I empathize. I think an example of that is where the school district does a really good job of incorporating educator voice is like piloting curriculum materials, like I was talking about. That's something that I don't think every school district does, but we have the opportunity if we want to volunteer to pilot a program and give our input. And so before we choose a new curricular resource, the teachers get to weigh in about it. That's awesome. The pandemic was a good example of like when there's something that's not maybe a routine decision, educators aren't necessarily asked. For example, when the decision was being made whether or not to come back full-time in person, I was able to make my voice heard because I happen to have a school board member's child in my class and have a positive relationship with that school board member. And so then the school board members said, oh, wait, yeah, you haven't been asked. Let me go ahead and ask everyone, which was fantastic. But it was concerning to me that the parents were surveyed, but the teachers weren't. And now again this summer, we got an email that they're considering having some classes where kids are masked and some where the kids are not. And the parents were surveyed, which is great. They absolutely should be, but the teachers weren't surveyed. And so I'm not sure if the teachers are going to be surveyed or if it's going to be, okay, you can choose if you want to wear a mask or not, but we're going to put you in a mask class or a not mask class. And so it seems like if you're surveying the parents on something, maybe you should survey the teachers as well. So it seems like when there are those non-routine situations that come up, the educators are kind of an afterthought. And you know, maybe there's an assumption that the educators will do what they have to do that's best for the kids, because we will. But it would be nice to be a voice that's heard before the decision is being made.
Yeah, these weren't my comments either, but I think that was the voice overall that I heard as well. I also heard some frustration about the board listening sessions before the board voted, where teachers, it sounded like resounding, or I should say educators that were there and voicing seemed to lean one direction, and then, yeah, the vote just didn't go that way. So I think there was some frustration with that as well. And when I hear this person talk about the lip service, I feel like that's where it came from. Like, you said you would listen to us, you heard our voices, and then you went the opposite way.
Other thoughts?
Well, I do hope that the results of this data is certainly shared to the broader administration to get a pretty good understanding of how decisions are made moving forward. I mean, I was a little disheartened when I heard Izzy speak about a club that was literally dismantled because of a complaint of one parent. Like, how do we make a decision based on the desire of one individual? Now, that parent might have had strong justification, but what I like to say is that it is so important to have voices heard. And I think part of this goal and objective of this group is to ensure representation, is really to ensure that the voices, the essential voices that need to be heard to help make sound decisions for the greater good of the children in the community, is to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak.
guess I'll make a comment in general, gauging how candidates should be, I guess. I guess I will, for 3 years, I spent time in a position where I kind of felt like I almost never had any insight into what staff was feeling about anything. And the times when we did get that, it was something that I kind of had to aggressively pursue or, pester my kids' teacher about on random subjects just to hear like what's going on, because I felt like I was never actually getting any of that side. And there's 500 people who know better than me in the district about anything. And I'm sitting up here making a decision and I feel like I have 30 or 40% of all the information I probably need.
Right.
And that's not to say that's all administration's fault. I have, for the last 3 years, complained about how we hear very little from staff, and we do have time during board meetings to actually have staff talk about things. We just never had someone actually say things about, here's 3 things on your agenda, this is how the WTA feels about it. That never happened. I think that happened once, and it was my first board meeting, and it was Cindy Lindquist complaining about something, and I thought it was great, and it didn't happen. So, I mean, if anything, I would encourage staff to try to utilize their voice as much as they possibly can by talking to people. And that, Mel, going off of what you said, those listening sessions, particularly the ones that Dave and I did last July, August, we were strongly discouraged not even those. And I kind of understand that discouragement too, because on one hand, if you start listening, you start having conversations, then you don't do what you're asked to do, then it's like you ignored these people. But at the same time, if you don't even listen, it's like you don't even care. And I spent 3 years listening to board statements that the board would vote on unanimously. To be totally blunt, it's this pablum that is like, oh, we love you, we appreciate you, and yada, yada, yada. And I got really tempted to vote against them at some point, because that's just words. And it doesn't really, I can't imagine feeling good keeping those messages. But I would hear staff say at times, thank you for putting this message out too. So I just shut up. I do really think we need to follow up on those things with actual action. And even if you don't agree with what's being said, then you do have to acknowledge what's being said and incorporate it in some way. And then you've got to start by asking. So I mean, Bethany, I'm sorry that there isn't a question being asked about, would you like to be in the potential cohort of kids that are wearing masks for 3 months or whatever? I don't know why it isn't asked, but I assume there's usually a good reason for it. But that being said, you've got 7 people who are making decisions that don't know what's going on. And I can say that I made decisions about really know what's going on. And I can tell you there are people that are not actually looking to find out what's going on, that are sitting there now. So.
Yeah, well, that's the unfortunate about the individuals that are sitting in the room, because I do think that part of my role, very similar to the school district, I also serve on boards. And part of your role in a board leadership is to do your own research and homework to be able to make the decisions, to be able to really understand those constituents that you are representing in the community, as well as the educators, and more importantly, also the children. So that is really important and very essential to the work that is being done with leadership at the helm of the school district. That is essential. It really is. And this is someone who understands what leadership means across all spectrums. That is really important. It is not a position in which you have the pleasure of having what? Power, influence, and authority. That is not it. It is a position where you serve. It is a service. It's a servant leadership position. That's exactly what it means to sit at the helm of an elected role.
I do have to say, listening to what you're saying about the students or the teachers not being surveyed. Like, I guess my thing is, I would automatically just think that the teachers are in the know, right? Because they're the ones doing the work, you know, so to hear that, but then I would even take that further. If teachers aren't even able to, you know, voice that, what about, I mean, it really comes down to the kids. And what about those kids who are being lost in that pocket for whatever reason that may be? And again, this is not to attack, you know, everybody, but I think it's just nice to be able to identify those gaps, right? Because now that we have these conversations, it shouldn't be something that we just push aside and go, say next. Now we should be like, okay, what do we do so we can rectify that next time? If we didn't do it this time, how do we rectify that next time? So.
You know, I think, you know, on the one hand, we could say that the pandemic was a unique situation and it was a special case. On the other hand, it's when the challenges are difficult and it really shines kind of the keenest light on, you know, what's strongest and what needs further development. And I do think it's always important. Not everybody has, depending on the decision, not every stakeholder group can have a full say, a full influence in decision making because of the number of stakeholders to be accommodated. But there should always be transparency about what the voice is and how the decision is going to be made. So there's a lot of clarity up front, and there's no disappointment with how the process unfolds later on. And I think, as we think about again the scope of the committee, this piece is looking at the role of educators in decision making. We'll have ones will be coming through later that will also kind of speak to the role of the community in decision making as well. So decision making is kind of a theme, and input is a theme in the pieces we have today. Other comments?
So just to build on to how the process, but equally important is why the decision is being made. Because you may not have all of your constituents represented, but there has to be the why behind it. So why that decision was made? Why was there a choice not to include everyone's voices? Why was there a choice to decide on this particular? Why are we moving up, within this particular path? It's the why as well.
And why the decision in the first place?
Exactly.
The need for the
Yeah.
decision.
Mhm.
But you said an important thing, transparency, right? Because even if we don't agree with stuff, I look at it like, as long as things are on the table and you know why.
It's part of it, yeah.
I mean, it's huge, right? 'Cause if you can't see that process, but all of a sudden something was voted on and decided, and then it's just like, okay, there's no other pieces to it. So I do have to say what you said about the transparency. Making sure that we have that there all the time. When we're able to, right? Obviously.
And I think there's a how piece in it too with the educator voice. So like, I know this is summer, but again, here we surveyed staff and we only got, it's like 20–25% response from them. Here we're trying to get your voice, and how do you get more of their voice? In, like, okay, this is in this, or if maybe it's decisions at an elementary at the staff level, are they feeling like they're able to give their voice directly to administration and heard and all that, or is that through another survey, or is that just a meeting where they can voice their concerns,
Well, I can tell you, part of the reason this probably got fewer responses is because it came out at the very end of the school year. When teacher bandwidth was nil.
Yeah, I was just, I know that, like they said, it was summer, but is
Yeah.
this the case too, when we've done some of those other surveys, has our response been not as good? Or is it also too, because maybe the staff feels like, hey, why should I respond anyways, because they're not going to listen to me? I don't know, is there that bent there as well?
I think there's part of that. And then there's also just, again, kind of bandwidth. Like there are a lot of times where I have an opinion about something, but do I have the time or energy to make my opinion known? Maybe, or maybe I'm too busy, dealing with my 22 students who are really the most important thing for me. So, so like when it comes to, teachers, you know, getting up there and being vulnerable and, you know, speaking to the board or whatever, like, that can be hard because frankly, until it was something that was like really urgent, like I didn't do that. And then, you know, being vulnerable enough, like, do you know a school board member, or do you have the kind of relationship with your administrator where you feel like you can tell them something that they might not want to hear, or that might be, you know, not what everybody else is thinking? Which is where I feel like it needs to be more systemic, where it just needs to be a normal part of abnormal decision making, if that makes sense. Because like I said, the teachers are asked about curriculum materials and those things that we know are going to come up. But when there's something that's unusual, what is the process to make sure that, yes, parents' voices are heard, administrator voices are heard, and teacher voices are heard, you know, and students, you know, at different levels as well.
Do you think that's more of a building level administrative to staff thing to get worked out? Because I guess my experience with that is I know individual administrators and then I knew staff in buildings, and I would talk to administrators and get their input. And I'd say, what does staff think about this? And they give me an answer. And then I actually asked the staff. I can tell you they were never the same thing, except for number. So, and like, for example, in middle school, that's something that, like with Jeff, it's kind of excusable because he got hired and boom, you're not in the building with anybody, so that's a little different. But is that a disconnect there, or is that something that can be managed better so that we're hearing like how staff feels about individual things? Because you know, boards make 50 decisions in a night, and 30 of them are vetted through other committees or curriculum, or teachers pick the curriculum, went to the curriculum committee, went to the board, and it's done. Staff voice was in there, but there's a bunch of other things that it's not. I mean, would it be beneficial to have individual building administrators doing more of that outreach and talking to staff, hearing how they feel about things, and then reporting it up to the chain? It sounds like that doesn't always happen. I know it didn't happen with some.
I personally think it depends on the strategy that administrator is using to seek that information. Because if you're just asking a open-ended question in a staff meeting and expecting people to speak in the moment right then, they might be exhausted because it's after school usually, or they don't feel comfortable saying that in front of colleagues or saying that in front of the administrator. But if we used some sort of different structure to inquire and get those voices, when I think of a lot of our administrators have been through adaptive schools, are they utilizing that training? There's so many different ways to give staff voice without requiring them to raise their hand in front of their colleagues and speak up. Because sometimes you just might not have the words, and then you think about it when you're driving home, you're like, that was what I wanted to say, and I didn't think of it until now. So I think, yes, depending on their strategy, personally.
Yeah, or I think it could be, you know, doing a survey like this, but maybe having it be like, you know, everybody bring your device to the staff meeting because we're going to take this survey, and it's going to be during the staff meeting so that you don't have to carve out some time to take it when you're in the middle of trying to answer parent emails and do your lesson planning and stuff.
Which is fairly easy to do, because how many times have you been on a Zoom call and you can take a quick poll?
Well, we did it at the last community.
Yeah.
People who didn't want to speak up in
Exactly.
public, and
Right.
they were able to just.
Absolutely,
Text it in,
right,
anonymous.
exactly. You have an anonymous, yes, an anonymous and most likely honest feedback, authentic data that you can take back.
Okay, so for D2, the leading choice was emerging. The second choice was improving. I think this is where we'll keep the voting between emerging and improving. And Mike, you get to kick us off.
Feel a lot of pressure going first.
Well, and I guess I would say, would you like us to mix it up the next, we got the set of criteria, we'll mix it up next time.
There is a little bit of pressure because I'm not trying to convince anybody else, but I'm also tough enough to handle going first too. So I'll let you guys decide. I would say emerging in this case.
Thank you, Mike. Christy.
Emerging.
Thank you, Christy. Michelle.
Emerging.
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 Emerging. Emerging.
I'm gonna say not.
Emerging. everybody. Let's go on to E1.
So I just wanted to say, if anybody needs to like take a break, you don't feel like you can't get up.
We won't vote with anybody
Yes,
out.
yes.
I
But-
do have a question though, because isn't our charge, from what I understand from the board meetings I was listening to, we have to finish this today.
We will finish.
We
this
will
today.
finish. I appreciate all the discussion. I love all the discussion, but I just like.
Yeah, I'm getting a little nervous too.
So I will watch your watch, and if you do, is it Judge Janine that does
I'm
this?
good. I
or-
see that, Clark. I just do, I would love for us to be able to finish.
Oh, yeah, same here.
You know,
Yeah,
so-
we are getting this done, because that's why we're spending 3 hours.
And if we have to stay next to whatever, I'm willing to do that too, but we.
But better to
Well,
move.
it's
Yes.
Yes.
better to-
So E1, our school fosters positive teaching and learning conditions supporting culturally relevant instruction through professional learning opportunities focused on cultural competence and understanding implicit bias. The staff survey was at Emerging, which is the 3rd level, followed at a bit of a distance. So that was 58%. 23% were Flourishing, not at
Improving.
and improving, and then we had not apparent at 9%, and fractions probably 3 or 4% for Flourishing and does not exist. Survey comments, PD offered for these areas but not required. They have been an optional menu most often. Second, classroom teachers have a lot on their plates. Be wonderful if at times training for equity, diversity, inclusion, et cetera, would take place before the school year begins. When we are given choices to attend professional development days, we want to take part in all of them and then have to make a difficult choice of what to sign up for. A lot of lip service is paid to cultural competence, educator input, but it does not happen. Having book studies is not moving cultural competence forward. Putting into place a holiday policy that backing down when faced with parent opposition is disrespectful, and put teachers on the front lines with families and students in a perilous place. Is the Board of Education taking part in the training, and what is our plan to incorporate families attending our schools in these efforts? There is much more work to do incorporating restorative justice. Person added a link for this would have been available in your document, and working through implicit bias and strategies for off-site experiences. So this one elicited a lot of staff comments.
Yeah.
At the same time, there was kind of a weight on the emerging and then some on the improving. So with the understanding, we want to keep things moving. I'm sure we may have a few comments or discussions on this before. I'll start first.
So, so let me just kind of put this in words. So, like, I would have to say, after George Floyd's murder, that's when I think this started becoming more emergent. Before that, it wasn't as a parent, it wasn't as a parent. As a parent, I wasn't able to see this stuff. Just listening to my kids as they conversate and just kind of, just knowing what they're learning, that type of stuff. Not saying that stuff wasn't happening, but I think as the country started shifting and we started focusing more, and I'm just looking at our community, I really commend the school district for pushing forward and the book study with the village and doing all these things. Now, I think the only thing that I have questions about is when we're talking about classroom and exactly what's happening in the classroom in terms of curriculum. Maybe like you were talking before about how, certain things have to be done, but then what can teachers bring in, not bring in, that type of stuff. So I think that's the unknown part. But I do have to say, I do really see the progression that the school district has made moving forward. So for me, I would be emerging, but it wasn't to me apparent before we took this shift and the nation took a shift.
I mean, prior to George Floyd being murdered, I remember offering, like I was part of a training staff that offered something on implicit bias. And it was like, there were 3 choices you could have during this day. So you had 3 1.5 hour, I think, sectors you could sign up for. So I ran this 3 times, but there were lots of other menu of option, and some of them were related to cultural competence and those kinds of things. Some of them were more instructional based and maybe not as explicit in these specific things that they're talking about for professional learning. So I agree with the comments about it's offered. It depends on if you sign up for it or not, whether you're getting it. And I agree that it seems to have accelerated since that. But yeah, I agree that it's also emerging, and we have worked to make sure that all staff get that training, especially staff as they enter. So like, again, we're doing a better job, but we're getting a lot of new staff now. So what are we making sure that we're having in our new staff training and those kinds of things as well? So keeping our eye on that.
Yeah, I would echo that this was starting before, but then I think a year ago, a lot of us were like, oh, it's worse than we thought. Like, we've got to go now. And so things ramped up. But I think what you were saying about the curriculum and how we're all doing this expected thing for math and we're all doing this expected thing for reading, we're not all doing this expected thing for social emotional learning or for culturally responsive teaching or something like that. It's being offered, but lots of things are being offered and you can't do everything. So I think that is where we're emerging versus improving. I did really appreciate the comment that somebody wrote about what's our plan to incorporate families into this, because I think there's also some misperceptions about what we would like to do as far as culturally responsive teaching or what that would mean. And like, I think some people think it would only be good for certain kids versus it would be good for all kids. And so I think that that's something that I hadn't been thinking about as much as just like, man, I think we really need to offer this to, or not offer it to all teachers, but give it to all teachers. So all teachers can be doing it. But then also, you know, incorporate families into it so that families know what's going on and feel good about it.
You know, when you say culturally too, right, it seems like some people go straight to race, right? We're talking about black and white, but that's not really. I mean, every family has a culture too, whatever that culture is, language, traditions, or beliefs, all those things. So I think it's kind of broadening that terminology so people feel less threatened about, well, it's just focusing on those. That group.
So I always felt that it is so important to incorporate culturally competence within your performance evaluation. You should build it in to the work you do and how and what level of accountability, what type of training, how does that look for educators as well as administrators. I do like to comment about the Board of Education also having professional development in cultural competency, because again, when it comes to making decisions, they also need to have an understanding. And sometimes these individuals, I don't know if they do or not, don't fully understand, but being taught the same information that's being taught here at the schools would help. Perhaps having a half-day retreat that focuses on cultural competencies, and it also says understanding implicit bias. Learning it collectively, I think, is really essential to starting to make some progress and movement and understanding of what this looks like. Because as Joel has said, it is very different than race. It truly is. Your culture, your ethnicity is a very different definition than the word race. So I think that that is all very key and important for everyone to come together to learn, because I do think as a result of that, we'll be in a better place to educate parents in the community.
To add to that too, I think that it will also show it's transparent to the community what's actually happening
Yeah.
in the classroom. I think there's a lot of misperceptions, misideas of what it is that is going on in a classroom. Especially in the social studies types classroom, or maybe in some of the books that you're reading at the elementary level. They're not meant to indoctrinate, they're just meant to show different perspectives. And I know at the high school, we have a lot of classes that do have quite a variety of perspectives that are taught, because that's how you teach a social problems class. That's how you teach a sociology class. That's how you
Absolutely.
teach a history class. That's how you teach an English class. It's diverse. And so you have to have all those perspectives and shown out there, and then let students make their decisions.
Exactly.
So I think that it's kind of two-way. It's not just us going to the community, but the community understanding of what is being offered within the classrooms.
You guys ready?
So the leading option here was the emerging, and in second place was the improving. So I think we will go with that. And we're almost out of this section. So Mike, I'm going to ask you to kick it off again for us.
Emerging.
Thank you, Mike. Christy?
Emerging.
Thank you, Christy.
Emerging.
So really, when you think about this particular area, it's really not apparent. It's not apparent at all, in all due respect with emerging and the perception that are, that our 77 responses it's given. It is, when you think about it, what in evidence of some of the comments here, emerging, it says element exists as written policy or practice. Cultural competency in the school district of Waunakee, Wisconsin does not exist in policy and practice, or it's not as evident, if you will, at least from my experience and experiences of others that I've interacted with. And that could be through educators, that could be through other parents, as well as administrators. I see that it's a very low, not apparent, but I have to go around with not apparent.
Leslie, it's not apparent.
Thank you for your comment on the second.
Just to piggyback off you, Leslie, I was the chair of the policy committee for 2 years. I don't think there's anything called cultural competency in
No.
policy anymore. And
No.
it's there in the ethics and the spirit of what the district's doing. But I agree, I don't think it's written anywhere.
It's not.
That's
Oh,
but
I've done homework. It's not. No, it's not. And honestly, it's not even there in principle. It's not even there in principle.
yeah, I don't think that ever crossed my mind until you said it. And I'm sitting over here thinking, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, she's right.
It goes to show you the perception of those that has taken this and probably have been invited to some of these workshops voluntarily, knowing that it's not required. It is not apparent in this school district.
And that's what's been so frustrating about hearing people saying, like, you're indoctrinating children and everything like that. Like, those people in the know that these things are not required. They know that the PD is not required. They're those thinking that it should be. So I'll just roll with this. So,
All right, so this is like hard for me. Be different. I honestly think that it's emerging. Now, the reason why, definition wise, I totally agree. But I've seen, or I know, the work that has been put in. That work didn't have to be put in. And I believe a lot of people put themselves forward to push that work. So for me, the reason why I say emerging is because of that. And I see that it's a priority. And to me, that's what matters now. To get it into policy, that's not happening, but that doesn't mean it won't get to that. Hopefully we get to that point as a community, But I do have to say, I have to reward with emerging because of what I see actually happen.
And I'm going to go with not a parent. This is one of our primary theories of action for why we have the disproportionality we see in special education as a lack of cultural competence in the classroom. Now, for Michelle, Christy, and Mike, when we started the voting, we were saying the voting is emerging or improving. So you're under no pressure at all to change your vote. But when you cast your vote, you were casting it, I think, with the concept that there were two choices. And so now we've moved it to free choice. So if you are interested in updating your position, I think we probably should give them a moment for reflection and the chance to speak. So, but,
Well, I mean, I think I agree with Joel, like he's saying, if we're gonna take it by purely by definition, okay, I guess it does, it's true. But I agree with you, we're seeing things happen.
As a
And
black
so,
male, and
I'm fine with going either way, because, you know, if we say not a parent, then maybe that's good, because then maybe that gives us the position to say, no, this is priority of putting it on the policy committee to come up with a policy for it. Versus if we say emerging, is that then going to be in our task list later to recommend that this is written policy? Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
But the difference with that is that doesn't mean we can't, as a committee, come back to that. And we can do that. We can go back and
Recommend.
discuss that. This is not like a final decision, right? Obviously, within this room, we're voting, and only how many percentage of people voted on this. So, you know, I think for me, the emerging, there's other communities who are doing nothing. That's how I look at it. And so that's how I have to process that. But obviously, we live in here. I don't know. I'm so for it, I believe.
so Christy has raised her hand.
If we are given other options, honestly, I would also say not a parent. And I look at does not exist as that's the, you know, the next option up there. And I feel like there's things that exist, but we have so much work to do. And I honestly think that this should be a priority to have some consistency. Otherwise, I feel like we're just putting Band-Aids on everything and we're not actually changing any kind of culture and making this a safe environment for all kids. So not a parent.
Thank you, Christy.
I'll say I appreciated the comments on both sides for not a parent and emerging. As an outsider, but somebody on this committee, I think there are some things happening. I also appreciated the last bit of this discussion too, though, because as a diversity, equity, inclusion group, like I do think we have to push to help move us forward. So I think I would probably go change it to not a parent. Number one, because it's supposed to be a benchmarking tool to say where we're starting, and it also should be charging our work. And also, I would say probably based on the fact that we're not meeting it by definition, the more definitions of the rubric that we have, the less likely it is to be highly meaningful information when we get on the back end of it, when we're looking what we want to do with the information that we've identified.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Mike. Get that down, Rebecca. And we will move on to E2. Our school has a plan to evaluate the relationship between educator training on cultural competence and implicit bias and student achievement. And the leading vote getter was not a parent with 41.6%, followed by emerging at 28.6%, 13 points each for does not exist and improving, and probably a 3% slice for flourishing. And the staff survey comment was, since we have not committed to this PD consistently, this cannot be in existence yet. And again, this actual prompt is not as the PD occurring. The school has a plan to evaluate the relationship between the training and student achievement. So that's the actual question.
So how many people actually took? Well, it's not broken down, right, per question, it's just a survey.
There's 77 on this one.
Also,
77.
Nice got a hand up.
Tim, do you know whether or not the district has a plan, like in fact, to do that? Because I can tell you, I don't know that it exists
Right.
if it does. So I mean, there's no way I can say anything other than does not exist or not apparent. And the way I answer questions that I can't prove that it doesn't exist, therefore I say not apparent. But do you know whether or not there's actually a plan?
We don't actually have to my knowledge, a plan to do this. And we probably, I'd probably know about it if we did. I mean, I will say, putting on the research hat, that's a big jump between the training and the achievement. In the research world, you'd probably say training to teacher practice, and then you do another study on teacher practice to student achievement. But regardless of how you structure it, I'm not aware that we have it. So I would actually argue for a quick vote.
I was gonna say.
I would too, right, exactly, right.
So, Mike, I'll ask you to start it off based on what we've described. And I think
That means,
all of the voting tables, I think, are open to this one, including does not exist.
I was gonna say, and getting to go first this time also means that I wasn't demoted from last time. Is that what it means too?
Your reputation's still intact.
All right, good. I'm glad to hear that. So I would probably go with emerging on this one.
Thank you, Mike. Christie?
I'm gonna go with not apparent.
Thank you, Christie. No?
I think I was gonna say it doesn't exist because it doesn't sound like it even exists.
I'm
But it's also not apparent.
But
That exists.
right, exactly. So I would say it just does not exist. Doesn't exist.
Same, does not exist.
If it exists, it's not apparent. So, I'll say non-apparent in case something is written somewhere.
Does not exist, but I want to know what like Mike knows. Like, can you explain your answer?
We don't know. We don't know.
Like, why did you do Immersion?
Oh, now they're putting you on the hot seat.
Yeah. I will say that I'm misunderstood and I was not well informed. So that was my answer. So I'm demoting myself. I'm not going first the next time, but I'm only need to sit out. I only need to sit out one time because then I'm ready to go after that.
I know,
So
that's right.
that was my answer. Not a cop out.
Fifty-fifty.
Just, I didn't do a good job of being a committee member right there. So I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay. Okay, and I'll go with does not exist. So now we're gonna come down to the Fs. And Christie, just for clarity, you are now going to lead us off, and then we're gonna go to Mike, because he can devote himself by one position around the table, but not that much. So F1, our school has a policy addressing student safety issues on and off site, such as bullying, bias-related incidents, and violence against marginalized persons or groups. Then there's advice in here where to find, consider your school and district policy identifying, preventing, resolving, and reporting these safety issues. The response on the teacher survey was emerging. As a subcommittee, teed this up. All of the relevant Board of Education policies and forms are linked to in here. And you can see that the leading vote getter was emerging at 40.3, followed by improving at 35.1, then not apparent at 14.3, and if I had to guess, 4% on flourishing and 2% on does not exist. And one staff survey comment, once the reporting system is in place, this may be a better rating. However, in our current status, this is limited. And I guess, just from a discussion standpoint, and the subcommittee's work reflected this, we have a fairly broad set of policies on the books that our Board of Education has adopted. And when, and ultimately this is a policy aspect. And so when persons bring something to teachers and especially administration, it's followed up on. I think, the question is, with the policy, does it still operate at a high level so people are utilizing their opportunities that the policies were afford them? I think as I thought about this, that was the question.
You know what?
I'll start.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So this is a hard one, because I think that, first you have to put in a teacher or administrator's hat on, and then there's the student hat. And with this question, yes, and faculty and staff, we know the policies, we have to read them every year, we have a little bit of training on them at the beginning of the year. So I'm aware of the policies and how to report things. I think though that from the student perspective, there's a lot of things they don't say. And then that doesn't get reported. And then when they do come to you, it's sometimes because it's been a while that stuff has been going on and they just can't take it anymore. So it's like, how do we get this information, in my mind, more to the students? I think the staff is aware of this as part of the in-service every August. We sit, including for parent educators, we're exposed to all of this. I think that in the small groups, like the BSUs, the Soñadores, the GSAs, all the different groups that we have, there's probably more talk amongst them of some of the things that they go through, and there's hopefully some education through there from their advisor about how to report things in a way that might get some responses. But I don't know, I feel as if students, this is not as apparent for students. And sometimes it goes a little too long, and then, all of a sudden on Facebook, I read stuff and I'm like, oh, why did that have to happen that way? Or it's because a student finally said something to a parent, and then the parent gets involved. I'm not quite sure that students know always who to go talk to, or would feel comfortable always going to talk to. So they'll go, oh, that's just the way it is. That's something we can work on. So there are policies. I'm just not sure how far down the chain. And especially for younger kids. At the high school, I think at that point, they're definitely coming more into themselves and they feel more confident to speak up. But not all.
So I would echo what you said, like, there's policy, but in terms of, I think about the students are not going to. I have an opportunity to sit in and listen to student feedback. And the stuff that students are telling me, that things that happen to them, and that they don't even report it, or if they do report it, some teachers may respond one way, some teachers may respond another way, or they don't feel comfortable going to any teacher, right? So it's just like, okay, why is it this gap? Is it because the educators don't know how to respond, right? So just say a teacher, a kid comes up and says something happens in the classroom. Like, what does the teacher do in that moment? Or is it something that's pushed aside until end of class and then it's too late, the missed opportunity? And I think that's why I'm glad you both are here. I think Izzy, when you probably speak more to this in terms of like having those conversations with teachers and what that response may be, even if there is a policy, like what that outcome is, you know.
I can speak on this, because like I've been in a predicament where like I haven't told a teacher, and then I've been in a predicament where I have told a teacher and nothing has been done, and I've been in a predicament where I've told a teacher and something has been done. And like my perspective, like again, when I was in school, I know who the teachers I went to for something to be done. I went to the teachers that I felt close with, and then there's some times where there's an issue or there was just an issue in the classroom where I told a teacher, and they just said something, but nothing was done about it. Like they just gave like the general, like, be kind to everybody. Like you have to actually do something about it instead of just saying that. And there's where like back in 8th grade, like I still have this like haunted memory of me being called the N-word, and I haven't told a teacher about it because the kid came up to me and was like, nothing's being done because it's white Waunakee. And like that stuck with me. So it's like there's different situations. So like as you said, like as a student, I would put not a parent, because it's like I know there's policies about it, but like we don't really get talked about like that either. Yeah, we get talked about like the first day of school, but all that goes over our head, and we don't really care about that. All we're trying to do is just get out of high school. That's our major goal. That's just.
But I also feel like the reporting tool that I'm working on is going to be filling that gap. Oh, okay. Chris.
Can I speak really quickly? I, as a social worker, sometimes get involved in situations at the high school level and middle school with different students. And I just looked up the reporting form, and the last update was in 2002, and it says that it goes to the equity coordinator. So yeah, maybe these policies exist, but in the parentheses there, it says, consider your school and district policy on identifying, preventing, resolving, and reporting. And I would say most students probably don't know how to report, other than maybe coming, like was said, to a teacher or a school counselor or something like that. So I think we have a ton of work to do here. I do feel better about implementing our new reporting system, but I would almost say it does not exist. I mean, even though there is actual policy from 2002 on some places, and some of them may be more updated, but definitely not apparent. And I feel like we talk a lot about transparency, and I think the transparency for kids and parents to understand the process and how this all works is critical in that communication, so kids feel safe. So,
Chrissy, I just have a question. Who fills that equity position?
who fills out that discrimination harassment complaint form? Is that what you're asking, Joel?
No, you said you go to your equity coordinator or something. You said.
Yeah, it says that down on the bottom of the form. So I am looking at, because I was curious, the discrimination harassment complaint form, and it's one of the links there. And then at the bottom, it actually says that the first copy goes to the equity coordinator. I don't think we have an equity coordinator, do we? And again, this is probably old policy because it's from 2002, but again, I don't know. So if anything, we have to update the policies, which can be done because I don't think we have an equity coordinator. But maybe it's a different title now. I don't know. Can you guys click on that, Rebecca? I'm on my computer just looking at it. It's go down to reporting under complaint form, and then scroll down. And then you can see there, first copy goes to the equity coordinator.
Who, when this policy was written, that was the director of human resources.
Oh.
And,
Okay.
but I will say, and this is a good example of why there's value in revisiting these policies for all kinds of reasons. That is no longer solely the case today. That the non-discrimination coordinator, the equity coordinator for complaints is now a shared responsibility between HR and pupil services. So it had been last year, Brian Jabarski and Kurt Ely, and I would actually need to see with the portfolio adjustments, is it now Chris Mann? Is it Chris? Yeah, so it's Brian Jabarski and Chris Mann, our director of pupil services. So it's it's shared now. And that was due to some federal adjustments to title, I think it was federal on Title IX about 2 or 3 years ago. So I think we should vote. Okay, so the leading vote getter here was the emerging, but we also had significant not a parent and also does not, and also improving. So improving, emerging, not a parent. Does anybody want to add a 4th choice on? Or are we okay with those 3 choices? I think that means you're okay with the 3 choices. Christy, you get to begin, and then it will go to Mike.
I'm very torn between not a parent and emerging. If I take it literally, I guess I'm going to choose emerging because we do have policy. That's my vote.
Thank you, Christy. Mike.
And also still feeling like I need to justify my last experience on my chart here. I rolled down to this. I rolled down to this one, and that's where my emerging came from. And even though I was participating in discussion, I still am admitting that I goofed. So sorry about that. And I'm with Christy as well. I would say letter of the law, it's emerging, but as we really think about, you know, the student panelists saying that, you know, they don't feel like they have been heard or that kids are even reporting things that are happening, that is pretty clear evidence that in practice, it's really not there. So I guess as a group that's supposed to be driving change, I'm going to go not a parent. Sorry, that's why I try to be super fast when I vote, so you don't have to hear all that, but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mike. No.
I think I'm going to go with emerging as well. So the other part of that definition that we can't see, doesn't it say, but is not sufficiently demonstrated? You know, under, is that what it says? After I say this element is demonstrated. So I guess I'm agreeing with everybody that Mike and Christy have said as well, but I think I'm going to go with emerging as well. It's there, but it's not sufficiently demonstrated.
Right. Emerging as element exists as written policy or practice, but is not sufficiently implemented or funded at the school or district level. That's where the dots are coming in. And so I would give it emerging because it does exist, but I do think that there are updates that are desperately needed and actions. I mean, there's so much space for improvement. We know that it's there, but it's definitely, we definitely need space for improvement.
Like do an emerging minus, that'd be great.
Yeah, right.
An E minus on the report.
Yeah, I think, I agree with that. Yeah, totally.
I think I'm leaning towards not a parent because I see that they want a policy for bullying, bias-related incidents, and violence against marginalized persons. I see a lot on bullying and I see some on the discrimination on basis of sex primarily. And I feel like we need some more expanding on some of those other topics that are preventing, resolving, and reporting as well. So I would say not.
So I will say that the student discrimination and harassment complaint, it says procedures, and it does highlight about, basis of sex, color, which should not be, the word color should not be in there. And so that's a heartbreak right there. Handicap, national origin, ancestry, creed, pregnancy, religion, so discrimination. So perhaps that falls into the bias. Yeah, anti-bias, perhaps. But yeah, it does mention.
Emerging.
And how close were we on that? Would Mike be a deciding vote?
4 non-apparent and 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 emerging.
Okay, so I think we'll move on. Yeah. Okay, F2, our school has policies in place to follow a best practices model regarding discipline. And Overall, the staff responded with improving at 42.9%, followed by emerging at 33.8%, not apparent at 16.9%, NA at about 4%. I think one person responded does not exist. I think that's what that slices. A few staff survey comments. I still hear about the application of zero tolerance policies. We continue to push students out of schools through expulsion and suspensions. With regards to discipline, spending thousands of dollars and countless hours of in-service and prep time only to be told we're doing PBS light because our students don't really need it shows no real commitment at all. Also, I think our school needs to work mostly on the last one, F2. We have a really tough bunch of students going into 4th grade, and while everyone's doing the best they can with this group of students, there really needs to be a consistent model. And then the 4th comment is, and there's a link to this, we've been studying Ross Green, and we know that kids do well. I think this should be when they can, not can't. And then we are trying to fit square pegs in a round hole, and we continue to push students to follow a daily schedule. We learned from COVID that some students thrive in condensed schedules, smaller groups. What can we do as a district to provide alternative learning environments to help students grow academically while slowly transitioning them to a regular schedule? And then there's a whole bunch of links around our policies, and also what are some of the best practices resources. And there was a reference to zero tolerance, and a zero tolerance is where the policies and practices remove a lot of discretion. If the behavior occurs, there is going to be something that will automatically follow. And traditionally in school, and you can see this a bit in our policies, would usually be in the area of weapons or drug offenses. So with that, we'll open the floor for any questions or discussion before we vote.
I mean, I do have to say, my kids talk a lot about those drug dogs coming in. Well, honestly, that's what I heard from my kids who were younger. They're like, oh, yeah, the dog's coming in, they're sniffing. But what I'm saying is that it's supposed to be encompass a whole bunch of things. So it's just like when you're just focusing on certain areas, like with the drug use. And I don't really know about, when we start talking about behavior, discipline, that type of stuff. So I think it's hard for me to really judge that one because I don't really know. I think another thing that would help me is, and I don't know if people know, like, are these policies on the district page? So you could, anybody in the public will know where to exactly go.
And any of these links, yes.
So that was helpful to be able to, your parents to be able to send testing.
So I did a lot of the background links for this for us today. And so diving into, best practices from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction says alternative policies that are best practices for discipline would include targeted behavioral supports for at-risk students, character education and social emotional learning programs, and school-wide positive behavioral interventions and supports. Again, I think it gets into this, we have a lot of those things in practice. They don't, if you look at the actual policies, like we don't have those explicitly in policy. There are many policies that have any student may be suspended for this conduct. And so there's some language that allows some decision-making from, I'm guessing, associate principals or principals in it. There were a couple, like you highlighted, Tim, that have a mandatory amount. So there are some that says you will be suspended from school for 5 days. That one is in the gang-related activity one. So there are some policies regarding discipline that have that may, and there are some that have that will language. So I think there's some evidence of the zero tolerance policies in existence, which what I found from my research on DPI's website is that zero tolerance policies tend to not be best practices.
And to add a little context here, just because even within school staff, very few people actually work with expulsions. In Wisconsin, school districts do have, I should say school districts, boards of education have the opportunity to expel kids out there, and that means you're gone. In our district, it has been a long time since we have expelled a student without services. So, and Mike and I would be pretty limited what we can say because you do too much and you're getting to identifying information pretty quickly. But typically what we have done for several years now is when a student is removed by expulsion, it comes with stipulations. We continue services, usually off-site. Well, off-site, they're expelled, so by definition, it can't be on-site. But we do continue with alternative services, and sometimes there will be stipulations that if a student follows up with certain activities, then the expulsion can be revisited for an earlier reinstatement. So the district does expel. There are offenses the district will expel for. We tend to provide students with options under expulsions. I don't know if you'd like to add on to that at all, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder to not say stupid things out loud about what happened to any of those things, because they're all confidential. No, I really appreciate the way that Waunakee does expulsions. And I chose my words kind of carefully in terms of saying how they do expulsions, because it is kind of, it's a tool to reintroduce children into the schools. It's not used as a way to say, you're gone, you have to go somewhere else and figure out how to get educated. It isn't that way. It's meant to be something that puts significantly more leverage onto the student and the family to get into a position for being a part of the overall school community. And that's what I think expulsion should be used for. That being said, the things that I've seen it used for, I don't necessarily know if it's the right thing to use it for. I've commented in the past about I don't think it's appropriate to expel kids for having drugs in their backpack, but not to expel kids for acts of racial hatred towards other students. Which one is more harmful? It's not the weed, so why use that tool there if we're not using it in other places where it's more useful? So I'm not arguing in favor of expelling more kids, but we use a tool in a very effective way that I think actually helps when kids do get expelled. It could probably be something that the district could do more other areas where we could get kids more else.
Is suspension the same way?
So suspensions are short. Sure. So suspensions you measure in days, sometimes as little as a half day or a day. And you do provide, a suspension is like being out sick. So you're going to be provided with your work and the ability to make it up. Expulsion means specifically your status as a student of the school district has moved into a different framework. And actually, as Mike said, expulsion can mean you are no longer, even though you're a resident pupil, you are no longer a member of the school district. Though those of you can catch on with Madison or the Forest or.
What I was asking is more about the suspension, because you're saying it's just a day or two. Can't that be something that's longer for, so just say a racial offense that can you suspend people if they do this, they get this time?
So, best practices, what we can suspend kids for duration today, I would say is arguably greater than what a best practice would be. Because we're in the education business and kids learn best when they're in school. And I think if a student's involved in conduct that would need more than a 3 or even a 5-day suspension, then I think we have to kind of rethink the whole support system for that kid, my personal opinion, also professional opinion. But I would say if the student has a disability and there are certain protections for students with disabilities, that a certain number of suspensions automatically trigger a set of procedural protections. Now that's for students with disabilities, not a general education student. So the issue you would see in I see it little to not here, but you can see it sometimes in other systems, is your individual suspension might not be a 2-week suspension, but you're a chronic offender through the way discipline operates in that school. You keep racking up suspensions, and then over the course of the school year, it's a lot of time out of school.
That threshold is 10 days.
Not being able to put a number on an incident, right? That's not what it means. You know, obviously it has to be effective. What you're doing. So I just think about like how do we do that? How does this, you know, obviously you don't want to keep the student out because they got to get education somewhere. But at the same time, if there are behaviors that are happening, how do you address that? You know, just get them out of school one day or saying we can't do sports that week. Like, is that enough? Is it,
That's the thing, like, an expulsion, I think by state law, I looked at it in a couple months, I think it has to be done on the basis that the child is effectively leading to a dangerous situation in the classroom or in the district. And I always found it hard to stretch that logic out when the expulsion is for like drug possession, which is, you know, maybe no harm whatsoever. It's in a kid's backpack that they forgot was in their backpack. So when you compare that to something else that is actually harming other students in a way that is maybe lifelong trauma, how do you not treat them similarly or even differently?
Joel, I think you hit it on the head when we're talking about how is it effective? And I think that's where we want to get away from any zero tolerance policies where you have the defined consequence always there, because taking into consideration about what that individual needs in order to come back and be a citizen of that school appropriately is going to differ depending on the situation, depending on them and their context and all that. And I want to make sure that our policies give autonomy to those decision makers to make sure that we're putting something in place that will actually change the behavior in the future and not just keep it going. And I think what we found through educational research is that a lot of times when we're pushing kids out of our school is oftentimes then they just continue to feel like an outsider. What's worth, is it worth them wanting to come back and be part of the community again? And so I think one of the comments talks about restorative practices and really trying to get more into that to reintegrate this individual to be a part of the school community as appropriate, hoping that they won't harm another person again, for example. Christy's got her hand up too.
I have a lot of opinion about this, and I'm going to try to not be, I don't know, too opinionated in a way or say too much right now. But I have really huge concerns with our policies around our drugs and alcohol and the expulsions, because I work with all the alternative high school students, or what we call alternative high school students, after they get expelled, and what that looks like. Sometimes their incident varies greatly based off of like when it happened in the semester. So maybe the rest of the semester, halfway through, they won't go back to the high school. They'll stay over at the TLC. Sometimes that length of time is longer, and sometimes it just doesn't seem to have any consistency. And I worry a lot about that impact that kids have I mean, we're a growing community, but it is like once you've been shunned and you've done something wrong, the kids talk about it all the time about how they feel completely disconnected to the main building and they no longer feel welcome. I've had kids tell me that it's created incredible mental health issues. So I really would love for, I don't know if it would be like a little task force or something, to interview students who've gone through the expulsion process, because I think we have so much improvement. And I've had so many parents come to me after going through it saying, if only I knew, or if only I understood this, or if only this would have happened, or if only I could have advocated for my kid in this way, I think things would have been very different. So although it feels like maybe we have these great alternatives and we're not actually kicking students out of school, the emotional impact of having to come to the TLC can be really hard on kids. And then sometimes what we are noticing that happens is that they are so loved and cared for that sometimes they don't want to go back to the main building, which I also think is a deficit for some students. Meaning like they well, I don't want to even go into that. But so I think there's some strong work to be done looking at our drug and alcohol policy specifically compared to other districts. Because I've noticed some different trends of how things are written. I also think I want to throw in the word restorative practices, which is sort of like one of those educational words, but really looking at, are we repairing any of the harm that has been done for these kids to either themselves, teachers, others. And then I also really look at the safety issue. Sometimes there may be something in a kid's backpack, like they're prescribed Adderall or something, and it's zero tolerance. You've got something. I've also worked with kids that it's really complicated who might have self-harm issues and have like a pocket knife, and it's zero tolerance. They're out. So because it's a weapon. So it gets really sticky and ugly. But I do think there needs to be more work on this, especially the more kids I talk to who go through our process. It's scary too. And it's really hard for kids and families. So I think learning a little bit more from the kids who've actually gone through it would be really helpful in looking at how do we improve this process so kids feel yes, they made a mistake, but how do we help them learn and overcome? So that's my feedback.
I think we should be moving on.
Yeah, we have 30.
Yeah, we got 30 minutes
so-
left. Yeah.
So F2, the largest response was improving, closely followed by emerging, and then a segment for not apparent. Are we okay with 2 choices, or do we want a 3rd choice?
I think it's always healthy to have a third choice.
3rd choice it is. So our continuum is not apparent, emerging, or improving. And Christy, you lead us off, and then it's Mike.
I'm going to go with emerging, and I just shared some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Christy. Mike?
I'm emerging too, and the evidence I would use is that somebody included a risk ratio in the survey. So like that information is at some level being collected. Clearly there's some work to be done, but I would say emerging.
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 I say not apparent.
Emerging.
I'll say not apparent. I apologize for I missed the start of this too, but I did appreciate seeing the comment in there about a specific group. Because when I was on the board, that was something that I was asked questions about that, because it's getting into the borderline of what I do for a profession. And it's clear to me that there are special circumstances that we just don't necessarily even have it worked out yet. So just saying not apparent isn't necessarily a pejorative or attack on anything. It's just it needs more. And I don't know if that's been resolved now, but I still hear from my 4th grader about villages and heritage. It doesn't go there. So not there yet.
Emerging. Okay, so now we move on to criteria 6, family and community engagement. And just so we know where this is going to start, Monique will start the voting with you. And we will go around the table, and then we'll finish up with Christy and Mike. So Mike, you get to go from being at Christy very early to very late in the voting. So.
And I have to, I'm sorry, you guys, I have to apologize. I put a comment, but I don't know if anybody saw it. I have to duck out for my next meeting. So thank you for your time, and thanks for continuing to work on it.
Thank you, Mike. So A1, our school successfully engages families by accommodating family schedules and offering home visits. And so we didn't do surveys on this. These are notes. Family teacher conferences, those sometimes can be adjusted, but it's based on the individual teacher. We have no district guideline or policy on that. And then student services staff sometimes make home visits, but in general, teachers do not. So any conversation around?
Don't we have the results of the, didn't we fill this? We did this. We pre-voted for this.
So I think we did do it.
Yes, we did pre-vote.
Yeah, let me see here. This may be something.
Is that vote for 6?
Yeah, we
was on
did.
that survey. But I don't I don't know if you gave me any results.
Let's see if we can fix that.
So, Tim, while you are doing your research, can I just comment? So, our school successfully engages in families by accommodating family schedule. Okay, I don't know anything about a home visit because I never even heard that that was even an option. So I'm gonna let you know that right now. I don't know anything about home visits. But one thing I will mention here is that the student teacher conferences this year has been the best that I have ever experienced as a parent because they were remote and I did not have to stand in long lines outside of a classroom to wait and meet with teachers. And by the time you're done with one, you might be a third through the other teachers you have to meet. So I do think that we have, I think that we have opportunities to think outside the box with parent-teacher conferences and not have that archaic system that we've had in the past. Everyone show up at the same time. You either have a half day earlier in the week and a half day later in the week, but it depends on what the school is. So if we could think about that, in addition to scheduling, I will say that I realize that students' workday is traditionally done about 4 o'clock, is it?
Is it contract time?
Yeah. 4:15?
3:50.
3:15, okay, 3:15. So most parents are not done with work at 3:15. So I have found it to be challenging scheduling time. Now, of course, if we're going to create a culture allowing for remote interaction, I think that that will make some really good improvements, some strong improvements with scheduling. But I think that we could do a better job with scheduling. So let's see what the data shows us.
At the high school and at all the schools this past year with parent-teacher conferences, oh my God, we loved
Yes.
doing those 10-minute scheduled interviews. I mean, at the high school, we were packed.
Yeah.
Normally, you would be waiting 30 minutes.
Oh,
maybe to go see the
oh,
math teacher, and then you
easily.
didn't get to go see the English teacher.
I didn't, because it would be
I hope-
clearly across the bill. Another one would be clearly across the
I
building.
truly hope that we can keep
Yes.
virtual parent-teacher conferences. That was overwhelmingly well received by parents and by teachers.
So just so I really want to stay on time. So let's just go by the majority of what we see here.
And this is gonna be easier because these are our votes, not a fact.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully. No. We're not always told. So on this one, criteria 6A, we voted ourselves as Immersion. And so if there's anybody who strongly feels for improving or flourishing the voter that wants to change their minds, anybody want to make that bid? Okay, so we will go with Emerging for 6A1. 6A2, our school submits data to our district annually on family and community engagement. And for this, as you may have noticed, we do that in 4K due to funding. Other buildings are not required to do so. And so kind of the consensus was, it says a little stronger majority for not a parent. There was some for emerging and then further up. Is there anybody from the emerging, improving, or not existent that want to make an argument for that versus the not apparent? How we vote it up. Is there anybody, after having seen the votes and this mini conversation, that would like to discuss something other than not apparent? So I think we're on not apparent for 6A2. 6B1, our school has a full-time community liaison tasked with engaging and representing families, as well as conveying school policies and procedures. So,
Is that like the social worker?
No, that's Annie.
I took that as Annie Blackburn and also Angie Ramos, who does the translations. Those were the only two
Didn't
that I
Angie
could
just
think.
get hired?
Angie was hired this summer.
But I mean, before that.
She was on. That's why we have it.
I guess I don't think Annie's a community liaison, that
Yeah.
engages persons' families. She's the communications person
She's
for
the,
the district.
yeah.
And Bays.
Right, and she's great at that, but she doesn't represent families, so that would kind of say that doesn't really apply to her.
But in your notes here, we do not have a position in a district like this procedures,
Yeah.
like this. You just said that.
Because it seems like that would be the person that Angie and Annie would
Yeah.
be working with.
So I'm assuming that's what it is.
and the closest we have for this would be actually within EL, the family liaison position within EL. But that's a very narrow role for an important, but only part of our population. So this is not something our district is making on.
Do some school, I mean, does this position exist? It seems like to me it'd be like a board member that would be the community liaison. But I'm just curious, does it exist in other places?
It does.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah.
Verona, I think Verona does.
So, I mean, the purpose of something like this is to really try to get into the community, and particularly as people come, to make sure that they understand
Policies. and-
policies, what's going on, and also bring information back. And, you know, you think about if you're a new family moving to Waunakee, you tend to work, you know, your social network, social media, things like that. For people who don't have those connections, this can be a real benefit. And even for the people with connections, this can take some of the work off the shoulders, so to speak. Or you know, if I go to this person, this will be different, you know, no offense, Mike, but I mean, sending something out to Waunakee, can you talk, is like, you know, putting an ad in the paper, but as opposed to, you know, here is the helpline, get in touch with this person and, you know, you'll get somebody who's, their job is to help with this.
Well, again, representing families, there's no bias there, right? So you can't be somebody who's elected. Right.
True.
Because, yeah, you know.
All right.
It'd be nice.
Does not exist.
Does not exist. It really doesn't. So, 6B2, our school empowers family members and caregivers to access and utilize school materials and information in their context, providing information in multiple languages and formats. And so the overwhelming vote here, you know, was for emerging. There were 2 folks who voted for not apparent. I mean, I will say, as somebody who sends stuff through our mechanisms, but is not directly responsible for this part of our operations, what we're doing today is significantly different from what we did 3 or even 4 years ago. We obviously have a long way to go, but we have, there was a time when very little was translated. And now we have good translation in our largest language, and we have a much deeper interpreter or translator group to call on to meet us.
You know, but the thing is that, I guess, is it just Spanish speaking? Is there any other language that's spoken?
Yeah.
That needs to be translated, or that you guys have identified?
Yeah.
And yes,
We have 12 languages represented in our EL
so
program.
it goes out to all languages.
No,
So, because all I see is English and Spanish.
right.
So that if those other subgroups, how do they get that information?
So Chinese is the second language. We do have some people who did Chinese translations. I don't know how much is being translated into Chinese through the system that we have. And even though we have about a dozen languages within the school, we have more than that are home languages in the community. I don't want to say the exact number because I might get the number wrong, but looking at our, when kids come in and register, there is a wide variety of languages that are spoken at home within the community, but that does not mean that the student needs, that the family needs translation or that the student needs English language services. So it's complicated, and new students who come to our school district do take there can be just a quick assessment of will they need services, and then we get them into the system, test them, and go from there. But there are a dozen languages spoken through the school, and then home languages outside of that don't affect the students' educational work in the building.
So I think we had a super majority for emerging, and we've had some conversation. I think not a parent, we've got more than a not a parent would be for this, but we're still definitely emerging. Okay. 6C, our school offers out-of-school time learning programs and wraparound services such as health, language, mentoring, and tutoring. And so we had a consensus on the rare 100% consensus for emerging. And again, out of school means literally out of school. These are the wraparounds, these are things happening either after school or out. 6D, our schools require all educators and administrators to participate in professional development, focusing on family and community engagement with input from higher ed institutions and community stakeholders as part of licensure programs and professional learning. And here it was mixed. And I wonder if part of it is just due to the prompt itself, because when we were talking about this in the subcommittee, we said this is kind of not a great prompt. But we were kind of spread out between some being in emerging, some being in non-existent, some in not apparent, and a little bit in improving. And so I think the key stem here is all educators and administrators participate in professional development focusing on family and community engagement. All educators and administrators, family and community engagement. And so I do, now there is more in some licensure programs than others, but in terms of school-sponsored professional learning, we don't have a requirement on family and community engagements. That's, so I think, you know, while we did have, well, the leading vote getter was emerging, and then we even had some improving. I think if we really look at all, and again, I'm going to step back a little bit here, but I will say from the PD side, we do not require this of all of our educators and administrators.
Can I make a comment going back to our EL families? Because we as an EL team, which is 5 of us, 4 teachers and myself as a para, we do take on family and community engagement. We have a family night that we put together. We've tried in the past to do 2 family nights. One in the late fall as the students and the families are coming in to get them connected. And then we like to do an end of the year where we normally have the final access scores and we can congratulate the kids that have exited from the program and just get kids and families ready for the summer. Honestly, it's become really hard to continue that. I mean, because of our school responsibilities to take on family and community engagement, it's a lot of time. And it's kind of falling due, especially right now with COVID. I hope that we can bring it back again. But we would love to see more focus on family and community engagement for, I'm sure, lots of different populations within our school. Our Yale families definitely enjoy coming, and we had a lot of school support for doing it. But it'd be great if it wasn't falling on the teachers' shoulders to plan that.
And again, I think and thank you, Monique, I think a key thing is professional development on family and community engagement, because as Monique has described, we have activities for language learners. And actually, in many ways, shapes, and forms, we do have a lot of family and community engagement that happens, sometimes organically, sometimes as part of traditional school activities. But in terms of making sure everybody's trained up in it, that is not a part of what happens. So we have a mix here. I feel we should probably kind of do it around the table and vote on this. Don't you think, Joel?
Yeah, let's just vote.
Yeah, just which one you want. And Monique, you're first. We'll be coming around this one.
So I'll go with Immersion.
I'll go with Immersion, sorry.
Emergency.
I'll go with not a parent. And then we'll finish here and then go back to Christie. So, Michelle.
I was gonna say not appear and not exist from what you're saying. We don't require it, so
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like it really even exists, so. I'll say it doesn't exist.
Okay, and I'll say not a parent.
Not existent.
Does not exist.
And I should change my vote. I should have said not exist. That's what I had said. Christie, what is your vote?
I'm gonna go with not a parent.
I didn't hear Bethany. I'm sorry.
Not existent.
Thank you.
How do we turn out on that one? Rebecca?
Um, 5 emerging, 3 non-apparent, 3 non-existent.
We can always highlight that in our report, though.
Yeah.
So let's keep rolling
Mhm.
to now on to
7.
7. And our district guarantees sufficient funding and makes adjustments for school level, size, and location. And so there were some reports we get from DPI. They're actually federal reports that were linked to off the document, and some benchmarking data from other districts. And it really is open for interpretation. I mean, what is sufficient funding is a debated topic in education policy. But do we make adjustments for school level, size, and location? I think that's another question. So we not surprisingly, because it's a complicated topic, we split. So we had 27.3% in flourishing, we had 27.3% in improving, we had 27.3% in emerging, and then 18.2% not a parent. And so I know we're getting late, but we might want to have just a little time on this one to sort out our thinking a little bit. If somebody has a strong case they want to advocate for one of the four.
The Waunakee, that's what. So we know if there's money now, obviously I know the money. That type of stuff, but I don't think we lack. Now, I do have to say, and this is probably because even with, obviously COVID came, so in terms of random school and stuff, having the modular classrooms, I think that to me, yeah, that's where the adjustment has to come, but I feel like we were going to do that in terms of adding another school.
One thing I will observe is that, when you look across our schools, this is a unique question for us. First of all, we don't have a lot of adjustments by level, size, and location, simply because within those, because when you look at a Waunakee compared to, say, a Madison, which can have both a Hamilton Middle School and a Sherman Middle School, there's a lot more consistency among our schools, and in part because outside of elementary is the only place where we have multiple sites per level. Once you get above 4th grade, all 5th graders are in the same building, all high schoolers are in the same building. In larger districts, that's not the case. So, there are some differences. Mel brought in a point where there have been adjustments and hasn't hit her building yet, but she has a larger student role than some others, and that was because there is a decision made when adding school psychologist staffing, where was the greatest need for the next round of staffing, and that staffing was allocated towards the area of identified need. So I will say, from my perspective, it happens. Does it happen enough? I will say that we certainly do make an attempt. But again, the way our district's set up makes for a lot of consistency.
Right. You said that in a much more diplomatic way than I was going to say, because I was going to say the way this criteria is worded makes the answer almost meaningless, because using the word sufficient funding, or whatever sufficient is good enough, right? And then level, size, and location, there really isn't that much of a difference between places. When I initially looked at this, I thought sufficient, I was thinking equitable or equal funding, and in my mind, well, certainly not, because you've got things like sports that have booster control funding for the most part, and you have things like PTO, which is not equitable in schools too. So in that, the district doesn't guarantee sufficient funding. It's certainly not equitable between different groups, but that's not the criteria it's really asking for either. So
coming from an elementary standpoint, where that's the only, level where we have 3 different buildings, I feel like there's an effort being made to look at equity between buildings. Like a few years ago, there were some realizations like, oh, this PTO gave this school this, and now this school doesn't have it. And so, there was some work to make that more equitable. Is it completely equitable? That's debatable, because like we had a comment today about having an assistant principal at 2 schools and not the other school, but the 2 schools that have it are both bigger than the 1 school that doesn't, but are they twice as big? No. So, I think that there's still work to be done. I think there are efforts to be equitable, but I don't, so I guess I would say that would be an improving, because it's good, but I think that there's more work that could be done before it would be flourishing.
So what about location? So you think about operations, that's and then heritage. Does that make a difference in terms of where resources go, or what schools have better things, that type of thing? Or that's not the case.
it makes a difference for who is complaining and how well they.
I think it also makes a difference. I would say it's noticeable, the houses that surround the different schools, and then when you walk into the building, it also has to do with how new the building is. But I would say that there's a difference between the buildings. I think there have been efforts to, upgrade the older buildings, but are there pretty distinct differences when you walk into a classroom? Yeah.
I think if you'd also look at free and reduced lunch numbers among the elementaries, there might be some differences. And I don't want to quote that. I just hear the elementary school social workers talk about that. So I don't know what the numbers are, but I know there is some differences.
And there are, I think, and I feel bad because it's actually in the reports, but Arboretum the lowest, Heritage the highest, and Prairie is in between. Heritage, although it's our highest free and reduced lunch school, if you were to drop it into many districts in the state, it would be their lowest free and reduced lunch. But in those inequitable resource reports, I think somewhere in that report, it had the most recent data on economic disadvantage. So I think we should take a vote at this. And see if we
Yeah.
can get it all out. So all of the options are on the table for this one, and the need to get to kick us off.
When I had trouble just voting for the first place.
Mhm.
Emerging.
I'll say not apparent, but that's largely because I sat in a lot of meetings where I can't say that I ever saw this actually happening. That's just from my own perspective. But if it is happening, it's not good.
I say not fair, same thing.
I'll say improve.
I'll say not apparent. And I haven't sat in the same meetings, but I have certainly gleaned in and can tell that this is certainly not based on equity, especially in theory, it should be based on equity because it says makes adjustment for school level size and location. That's not happening.
I'll say improving, in large part because in the 8 years that I've been in the district, I've seen improvement.
I also feel like it's improving.
Christie,
I'm going with emerging.
So we have 5 emerging, 3 improving, and 3 non-apparent.
782. Our school has access to sufficient funds to support students in meeting rigorous academic standards. And so then consider your district budget and funding level to provide more than the basic needs of the school. And so our leading result was Flourishing at 36.4%. Improving and Emerging were tied for second at 27.3 with a little, no, I'm sorry. Improving and Not Apparent tied at 27.3 and a little slice of Emerging. And so, again, this is an interestingly worded criteria from the audit authors at the national level. But, you know, when I read this, are we able to provide more of the basic needs of the school? I think looking at our district in context, I would say that's the case. And for the life of me, I can't remember if I voted for improving or flourishing, but I was probably on the border. That was just me.
I'll start just the way I understood this question. I'm at the high school and I see the number of students who take AP tests. So I'm figuring that this must definitely be either flourishing or improving if the number of students that, I mean, it takes weeks to get all the students through AP testing. And there's also AP prep or ACT prep classes that are offered in the school. I believe students have to pay for that, but if they can't, I believe there's a waiver for that. I'm also thinking of like some of the clubs that we have. I mean, we have a very talented forensics team, we have a very talented civics team, we have very talented, if you want to put like music and drama into academic, which, you know, those are flourishing programs in our school. And we know that those are also skills that help you to improve your rigorous academics just by the participation in those types of activities. So I felt that our school district does rather well in this, but that's how I interpreted that question.
I'm gonna piggyback off of Monique if I can really quick. I'd actually play devil's advocate a little bit and just say, yeah, we absolutely have the funding. The question is, are students who need that funding actually getting access to it? So for a while, students who were on free and reduced lunch didn't know that they could take that ACT class for free. Now it's highly publicized, but that's within probably the last, I don't know, 3 to 5 years. When I first came here, it wasn't clear that that could be paid for. So I think some of it's just lack of communication and making sure we're on top of letting students know and how to promote and access. And that's just mostly from a social work perspective that I see that happening in more places than sometimes it's not intentional again, but it's something that we need to become more aware of and make sure that the kids have the access, if that makes sense. And some of it's helped with that new funding committee. So there are improvements, but I feel like we have to get the money to the kids who need it to do that rigorous academic work.
That's kind of where I was at. I feel like the sufficient funds are there, but are we actually helping all students meet those rigorous academic standards? We have discrepancies. We have disproportionality between achievement. So I don't think we can be flourishing when we have those gaps right now. But I do think we have funding in this district. So are we putting it in the right places is my question.
So I guess the one thing I would say is, looking at this section holistically, 7A is the first question: is there enough water in the bucket? And then we get down to 7B, for example, and is the gardener watering the plants based on their dryness and need? So I think, as I looked at it, 7A2 is, do we have sufficient funds? And I almost feel like 7B is getting more into that allocation.
Right, exactly. Mhm.
That's what we cognizant of this time. It is 4 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
So if you do need to, well, actually,
We have 19 people in the committee, and right now we have 11 people here, so we're still good.
So let's try to take some notes.
yeah, so how many do we have? How many things do we have left?
Not many. Home stretch. 4
This
more.
is the last one. D's the last
This is
one.
the last section, and we have 4 more after we. So for this one, I think we'll start with you, Monique, and we'll go around. All the options on the table.
Immersion. Improving.
I will go with
Immersion.
Moving.
I'll say improving, but I almost feel like I could say flourishing. And if we're just focusing solely on the access to funds, I feel like we're good as far as funding goes. But I'll say improving.
Improving.
And Christy.
I'm going to say improving, and then I have to leave really soon. So what will happen if I leave? Will we still be at quorum?
Yeah, we'll be good because we'll be at 10 and
We
we
can
have,
lose 1, but not 2. Could you maybe stay around for 7B though, if you could?
Yes.
This is
Yes.
your heart.
Yes, let's stay for 7B.
So 7B is the internal allocation. Our school district adjusts funding for diverse student needs, allowing for students in schools with the greatest need to receive additional funding. And some of the look-fors were English learners, special education, Title I, and free and reduced meals. And when we voted on it, number 1 was emerging, and then number 2 was not apparent. And then we had residuals for flourishing and improving, but we really kind of glommed on to emerging and not apparent there. And we really talked a lot about this on the last one, so.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
so I think let's start with the folks, we've already kind of talked about this, some of the previous criteria. And Monique, you get to lead us off.
I will go with emerging. I think there's much more attention being drawn to the needs we have within our diverse students. And so we're emerging.
Merging.
Emerging.
Marching.
Emerging.
Christie?
Emerging.
Okay. Criteria 7C, educators and families at our school, and I want to emphasize educators and families at our school have access to an up-to-date school budget and are included in the school budgeting process. And when we pre-voted, we were 63.6% on emerging, with some improving, and then a little bit of non-existent and not a parent.
That's all public information. So, decide.
The district, actually the district stuff is very present on the website. You have to dig more for school level stuff. It's partly because the reporting is still being kind of worked out at the state level, but district level stuff is, if you know where to look for it, is pretty good.
So is this talking about things on a macro level, like across the district, or a micro level as to what the classrooms are allowed to spend? That wasn't entirely clear to me.
Well, that's a discussion we had in the pre-committee too, is that the district budget is very clear, but then how things are allocated in the school, Bethany presumably knows what her classroom budget is, or grade level budget, where it comes from, and if a change is made, why. But I don't know if you know why Bethany's budget might change or not.
Right, yeah, so I mean, when I would answer this question, I would very quickly say not a parent. And the reason I say that is because I was on the school board for 3 years, and I barely felt involved with the school budgeting process because I wasn't on the budget committee. And I frankly think that it's like Steve and Randy go in a room and 48 hours later, somehow the budget comes out, and that is what it is, and then we see it 5 times and then it's done. Unless you're on that budget committee, you don't really say anything about it. We didn't have a single motion in 3 years by any board member to make any kind of modifications to it. It's entirely administrative driven. So if I didn't feel like I was included in the budgeting process other than voting yay or nay on it, I don't know how educators and families could have access to that and then feel like they're included in it. But that's just me.
I would have to agree. I would definitely have to agree. I mean, access to see the budget,
Yeah.
as you have indicated on the district level, yeah, but I mean, included in the process, not as much.
I mean, do people really want to be included? I know I would, right? Like, I guess, no, but what I'm saying is, I think that's why we elect people or choose people to do that stuff. So we trust that those things are being met. Now, if for some reason, I think about the teacher level, where they're not getting the resources for their classrooms to be able to do certain things, I think to me, that's more of an issue rather than a bigger thing where, the budget where you can see how much they're spending and that type of thing.
Well, I do think though, going back to our original conversation where we started off about voice and representation and making sure that, those dollars are applied or allocated in the appropriate spaces and areas. I think that's important. I don't think that is necessary for every, all parents should be part of it, but I do think that you need to have constituents be at the table with that discussion.
I've been in the school for 10 years. I've never seen an email that came out that said, oh, have some input in the high school budget. It's like I see them from the school board meetings and I see that they're there and I trust the people who have put it together. But to have access to it, yes, but to be included in the school budgeting process, I don't think I could answer yes to the second one.
When I think about full inclusion, I think about 2 things. and so then by the thing that I'm about to share, you can kind of draw your own conclusions about where this is on your thermostat. But for staff input, for probably the last 6 or 7 years, the board at kind of a midpoint in the budgeting process to early in the budgeting process has met with what we call the leadership team, which is administration, all of the academic department chairs, and all of the academic department coordinators. So the chairs and coordinators are all teacher leaders. And I would say that group is roughly a 45 to 50 person group. So that I want to point out that we have many employee groups and teachers are only one. But within the teacher employee group, 50 teacher leaders do have about a 2 to 3 hour meeting annually with the board to provide feedback around the organizing questions. When I think about staff feedback, that's the event that comes to my mind. When I think about public feedback, and I know this is actually about family feedback, there's a meeting late in the budget adoption process where there's actually what's called a budget hearing. But it comes very late in the budget process, and it's essentially a structured part early in a board meeting where Steve, our executive director of operations, provides a description of the proposed budget. And there's time specifically within that section, as opposed to other public comment, to provide public input only on the budget. But as opposed to the staff thing where there's probably 50 people brought into the process, typically it's very informative if you watch it at like a high level, not at the school level, but there's not a lot of community interaction for that. I mean, I'm going to defer to you, Mike, as a former board director. I mean, where you thought voices were coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it always felt like the decisions were made before they got to the board level, to be honest. And I mean, I love Steve. He's absolutely best person explaining any of these things, but I felt like I would really have to knuckle down, read everything ahead of time to even understand what was going on. Because Steve is very technical and very good at explaining exactly how things are accurate, but he also says it in a very dry way that I felt myself going into a food state sometimes when he would explain some of these budget details. Not the kind of things that people tune in to watch or understand or really want to hear about either. So I was going to piggyback on and just say that I do think it's very different. I'm glad you brought it up that there are these educational work groups that are talking about budgets ahead of time. So there are opportunities for educators in the school budgeting process. I guess I just should have separated out to say families, you got to be pretty hyper aggressive with watching agenda meetings and sending in a public comment. Because honestly, I don't know if in 3 years I saw a single comment from the public about the budget ever.
No. Who likes budgeting anyways?
Well, I will add on that, and this is just a factual observation. On those occasions when there has been input, community input, it's been from a taxpayer standpoint. And to be clear, that's an extremely important perspective in the budgeting process. But I'm not sure I can recall the last time we had public input from a programmatic perspective on the school district budget.
And this is different from things going to referendum.
Well, you can include that though. That can be included.
Yeah, I think of this, I mean, the way I think we read this in the subcommittee was the annual budget process. So again, we had a strong majority for emerging. Is there anybody who feel it would be different than emerging after a conversation?
Yeah, I think Immersion's fine.
7C2, state and district funding programs incentivize evidence-based innovation at our school. So this would mean that there's a funding program. There has to be an incentive in the funding program, and the incentive has to be tied to evidence-based innovation. And in some of the federal programs, you will I don't know that I would say it's an incentive, but you have to demonstrate that your project is evidence-based. I'm not aware that DPI or the district, I mean, to be clear, we try to do things that are evidence-based as part of what, as Bethany said earlier, when we're reviewing curriculum, we will look at the evidence base for what we're doing. But to say that we tie financial strings directly tied on evidence-based for innovation, I can't, I'm coming up with a dry there, I don't know. Think of a good.
I mean, I do feel like we spend our curriculum budget on evidence-based programs. So if that is the criteria, that I think that we do that, but it's not like there's an incentive somewhere to, or we'll get more funding if we do that. So that doesn't quite seem to fit what we're doing.
Because innovation's in this is kind of like, you know,
Yeah,
if you come up with a new idea, Bethany, that is evidence-based, here's $1,000 micro grant to go do it. I mean, we don't have any.
so I'm not aware of anything like that.
What about our innovation center at the high school? How does that fit in? Or the upgrades to our LMTC, just in terms of seating and the mod and the, you know, more student-friendly seatings. Are those funded through the school district budget?
Yes.
Those are innovations to me, so I'm just curious where those fit in.
Are they targeted innovation funding though?
Yeah,
So
I think
is it just, yeah, is
that's a
it
good point,
targeted
yes.
or is it just sort of built in, you know, these initiatives, are they already supported with allocated funding, or are they funding that is above and beyond what has already been sort of budgeted and projected?
There's a difference between betting on a fast horse and between putting a carrot out in front of somebody to kind of elicit behavior. And I think this is saying, do you have carrots out there to bring out ideas? So, I mean, we had a plurality for not apparent at 45.5%. The next one up was emerging, then improving. I almost feel like we kind of need to do a quick round and vote on this. And then I think D is our last one, so we're so close to the end here.
I'm feeling it doesn't exist.
I was gonna start with not apparent, because I'm not sure what is an evidence-based innovation at our school level. You see what Leslie is saying. I don't know.
What was it, Sam?
Non-existent.
Thank you.
Non-existent.
Not existent.
Non-existent.
Yeah, it's not existent.
Not existent. Not existent.
Okay, our last item, 7D, current educators and administrators in our school have opportunities to meaningfully participate in the development of a sustainable multi-year budget. Local efforts to diversify revenue streams are supported by the state. So when I thought about this, you know, that part I said about, I mean, I do think administration, I do think teacher leaders in particular have input. Now, some of our budget's multi-year because a lot of it rolls up from year to year, but we are really on a one-year budgeting cycle, unlike the state. The state operates on a two-year budget cycle, but the school district operates on a one-year budget cycle, but sometimes with multi-year horizons. And then the other part is, if we diversify our revenue stream, does the state support that? So there's really two different things going on here. Thank you, criteria. we had a super majority for Immersion, with a little bit of improving and a little bit of not apparent. Is there anybody who feels differently than the Immersion?
I voted
But I will say, speaking for myself, the local efforts to diversify revenue streams are supported by the state. I think that's kind of a not apparent to non-existent piece, but then the other wing of it, which is educators, administrators meaningfully participate in the development of a sustainable multi-year budget. I think that's got a little more, to support it. Kind of an interestingly worded item.
Yeah, it is. I think another area for us to think about, especially on a school level, that I know it's not apparent to me, about the local efforts to diversify revenue streams that are supported by the state. So what would that look like? And what do we do?
So
So looking at the budget, what various revenue streams do we have that are supported by the state?
I can only think of one revenue stream, and it's not a large one, where we have the ability to add funding from the state at any scale. So the state has a program called the Career and Technical Incentive Grant Program. And so at the high school, where we have our career and technical education courses, most of those areas have industry certifications. Anywhere from Microsoft certifications to your CNA exam. And the state provides funding for school districts based on the number of exams your students, the school doesn't get to pick them. It's off a list developed by the state in association with different industry groups. So we have a lot of kids pass exams, we get money that comes back, which in our case usually gets reinvested in our CTE programs. That's the only thing
So
where
that's
I feel like
one
we
revenue
got-
stream.
Yeah. So Joel, you said you were feeling kind of not apparent and not or non-existent, right?
No, I was more not there. I didn't say non-existent, I just need more information. I don't know what those other funding streams
Yeah,
are, so
right,
it's like,
exactly.
Unless you're in the actual mix of it.
That's right,
Yeah.
Well, in
exactly.
our district budget's over $40 million. We just got our last year's state award under that program, and I think it was $66,000. So it kind of, it's
Sure,
not
it's a very, yeah,
it's a very narrow stream.
exactly.
Yeah, maybe we just want to do it around the room and wrap up our
Absolutely,
voting.
yeah.
So, Monique, when you think about this one, where would you vote?
I will go with the majority of emerging.
I'll say, not apparent, just, that's not a district problem, that's just because I rely on the state to help us diversify revenue streams.
I'll go with emerging.
I'll say Immersion.
I'll say emerging.
Immersion.
Well, we've completed the voting on the audit. What are our next steps?
Yes, so I just want to thank everybody, because I know this has been a long process, not even just for today, but just the whole process. But, this is not the final, it's not the end. Obviously, these are identifiers at this point, and then, we'll wrap it up as a group, focus on other areas, and then obviously anything that we do or they're recommended to the board. So the next step is, what we're gonna do is prepare for our August 5th meeting. During that meeting, that's where Tim and I will talk about the reporting tool. We'll get that moving in place. And then any other issues that might come up that we have not addressed, because I think there's a lot of issues that we wanted to talk about, but because of other things, we didn't have time to do so. So that meeting, I know it's only an hour and a half, but I would ask everybody, if you do have very specific things, make sure especially for the agenda, send it to Rebecca. And then this way she has it on there, so that we can just address those things when we have our meeting. But the first thing that's gonna be the reporting tool, and then we'll get that done, and then we'll after that.
And I think another thing, Joel, that the audit subcommittee is probably gonna do is to go back to the totality of the audit and kind of bring out the scorecard. And we won't have time for it at the August 5th meeting, but we may want to schedule another August meeting because the board wants that report for September.
Yeah.
And that needs to be the committee's report. So we'll probably have a scheduling Google form.
Yeah, I guess I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, because the board does want to report, so we're probably gonna have to set. Now, I understand it's also, it's gonna be August, people are going on vacation and all that stuff, so we'll figure it out. We'll probably just send out another poll just to see when people are available. So then at least this would be a point to vote.
And then I think it would be good at some point, once we have that scorecard thing, is figuring out how we would like to communicate this to the community. Because I think that was that meeting the other, it was already last week, like it all blends together. So yesterday, last week. Because they want to know what we're doing, and we know that, all the stuff in the media is trying to link, because most of the DEI groups around the US are doing a lot of the CRT stuff, but people need to understand that they're really totally two separate things. And so I think there still is an education that needs to be done for the community on like, hey, this is what we've been doing. This is DEI initiatives. They're not totally concerned about, we barely even talk about race. It's all inclusive. So I think knowing what we've discovered and I just think it's been great knowing how hard we've actually been grading ourselves would be really great for the community to know.
You said it correctly. I mean, we're doing a lot of work that people just don't see, right? I feel like if people really wanted to see what we're doing, this is always open to the public. People could come read the minutes, what go on YouTube, that type of thing. So definitely, I think in terms of transparency, in terms of verbalizing, what we're trying to do as a committee, I think that's important, that voice. But I just realized that the work that we're doing is serving everybody, right? And I don't think we're doing anything that someone could say, well, no, we shouldn't be doing that because you're thinking about too many groups. But yes, I do hear you. I also do get a community. We're doing a couple, and we'll talk more about those things in our next meeting because a lot of these things fall under that. Kind of like what we're going to do, charging forward. There's things that's being worked on, that type of thing. So then I'll be able to communicate that.
So the question that I do have a question though, where does things stand with the Board of Education, with the district, the school board? With this committee,
So-
where does it stand, and what is it that they see? Do they see that we're making progress? Do they see that, what is it?
So
that
yeah,
they're-
so I have been in contact
Okay,
with Joan. And we've had two conversations just regarding this committee.
mhm,
Just kind of like the functionality, what we're trying to move forward. My thing is that I feel like we need more community voice in terms of sitting actually on this committee. So just kind of figuring out that as well, and what that process would look like. Same thing with having a quorum, like, a lot of people, believe it or not, drop them off. And the thing is that if we go by quorum and we can't do that, then we can't do anything. It's gonna stop us. So it's just kind of revisiting if we need that, and then also we got to think about, we need to be making progress forward. And what does that look like?
Right,
I think that's
exactly.
really what that kind of, because, I think in the beginning, and speak to this Mike, Mike is the one who started this group.
yep, we
right?
appreciate that, Mike.
So the thing is that with any group, you learn. And you just kind of have to keep developing, and you just, and I think we've done a lot of work within that period of time. And I think now we have more of a clearer direction. I don't think we're like there yet. But I think we're getting a better direction. I mean, finishing this was a huge thing. I mean, thank you everybody who was part of that subcommittee. You know, and I know it's hard to get people to vote, right? You put all that work in, and then you want people's feedback. So I do really appreciate everybody doing the work. So to answer your question, with the board, that's the other thing that Tim was saying. So we have to get that report. But what I'm saying is that that's why even during summer, we didn't just take a hiatus. We could have, because we don't want to start up when the kids are in school to get things implemented. You want things started when the kids are in school. So it's going to take that time in the board meeting and stuff. So yes, I'm in communication.
Right.
Telling you guys what's going on. So next, what is it, August 5th? So August 5th, we'll have more of that conversation, but I do please everybody just submit, because we do have short period of time, right? So just submit exactly what you want to focus on. I mean, obviously we're going to do reporting tool first, we're going to get that done. And then everything else after that will be just kind of like the vision moving forward. But please get it to Rebecca so then she can put it out on the agenda.
And please get it to me by the end of this week, actually. I'm sorry for that short, but our meeting's like right around.
Yeah. You know, because unfortunately, if it's not on the agenda, we really can't talk about it.
So I think what would be also helpful, Joel, is understanding, okay, so now we've completed the equity audit. And of course, you know, this committee has taken its marching orders from the school district, from the board. And so what do you see, and perhaps you as well, Mike, because you guys serve as vice chairs, what do the two of you see as our goals, the next phase of this? Because I think that would also help drive the agenda on August 5th. So what do you see that will be helpful for us to be productive?
So I'm working on that now. So I can't really give you an answer now because
Okay.
I'm going through all the documentation, just kind of going through what our charge is, what we're trying to do. Things are.
So the charge is the same, correct?
Well, no.
We're making some changes to charge?
We are.
Maybe that should be on the agenda.
No, we are going to be making changes to it.
Oh,
Our
okay.
Because a
charge
lot-
came from our very first meeting.
Yeah, because the thing is
So
that there's a
there's
lot
been
of
some
open-ended
changes.
stuff, right? We're not gonna be put into a box, right? Like you do this and that's it. But the thing is that things do have to pare down a little bit so that, you know, because unfortunately, you know, if we're too all over the place, then we have people saying, well, you know, you're gonna point to this, point to that. So I think it's just having a more clear cut, right? And I think a lot of that stuff might cut down on people's fear of certain things happening, not happening, that type of stuff. So those are the things that I'm actually working on. And it's really just researching a lot of stuff, looking at what we have in place.
Is it premature to suggest that for the August 5th meeting? Will we be
Yeah,
there
I
to
don't
do
wanna,
that?
the only reason why is because my mom's coming into town, I haven't seen her in 2 years.
Okay,
There's a lot of
Understood.
stuff on my plate
right,
that I'm trying to
understood.
do, and I don't want to rush the process too. I don't want to, you know, just do something to make it quick, but yes, there will be changes in that. But again, this is where we have our feedback too. This is why we have these conversations and we talk and we listen to the community and we implement things that are already in place. We see what other people are doing, but we have to realize we're doing what's best for Waunakee. That's what we're looking at, right? And for the kids, our students and staff and community members of Waunakee. So that, to me, that's the main focus, what we're trying to do, or the direction we should be heading.
So are we going to, once we have this whole scorecard, because I kind of, you know, I don't even remember on the stuff that we voted on like 6 months ago. I mean, it was very encompassing. Are we, once we have all that, just pushing that straight to the board? Or are we also going to have a chance as a committee to say, help put what the priority list is going to be? Or is the board going to be like, we'll make the decision based on what we read, what we think the priority list is going to be?
So, I mean, ultimately, the board's the decision maker for the district. So the board always has.
I'm just saying, then I like, we'll make the
Well,
decision, but are we going to give recommendations?
So this is-
Here's our
so-
list
so
of
to
the
kind
10
of
things that
draw-
we think
draw
Need to
a
go.
parallel.
Yeah.
This is an advisory committee.
Yeah.
Right.
In some respects, very much like the Human
Yeah.
Growth and Development Advisory Committee you and I were
Yeah.
both on, Michelle. So the committee has the option, and I would recommend the committee does it, is to kind of look at the scorecard. And if there are some priorities that the committee feels should be highlighted,
Make those
then make those recommendations. And so it is going to be important for the subcommittee to kind of get in the way back machine and kind of bring back the things we voted on back in the early winter in, so we can kind of see it all and kind of refresh our memories. It might come easy, it might come with some, rust coming off. But then we also, I think it's a question of, Joel, how does the committee want to kind of, so we come up with some recommendations or suggestions to the board, but then how do those get presented to the board? I personally would recommend a presentation rather than
Oh,
just
totally.
transmitting the report to the committee.
No, I think with anything we need to do, we need to present it, right? I don't think we should
I
just say, this is it, that doesn't make sense, right? But the thing is I also don't want to get caught in this where we're stuck just doing one thing, because I think unfortunately what ends up happening is that if we focus on one thing too long, there's a lot of other things that don't get worked on as well, and I think I don't want to get this committee caught up in that. I want us to be able to look at things and say, okay, we can shift from that to that and focus on this. I would assume if something urgent comes up, we should be addressing that right away. It shouldn't have to be something that we, wait a month or so before we decide to talk about it or even address it, because we don't know what's coming up, right? We're just an advisory committee. At the end of the day, the board can make any decision that they want to make, right? But it's no different than with them making COVID decisions. They have medical advisory. They have committees all over the place that do that. But at the end of the day, they're the ones who make that decision. I think, I think what's happening with a lot of people just dropping off, and I know some people are dropping off is because, I know this is because they didn't think this is what they thought it was going to be. And it's sad to me when people who have that passion to want to do this work, they just leave because they're just like, we're not doing what we're supposed to do, or we're taking too long on this. And so it's really just a balance. We really just have to be cognizant of that, be aware of that, because again, there's just, I'm seeing a lot of people just dropping off, and I know some of the reasons why people are dropping off, and I want to make sure when we're moving forward, we don't have that, right? We want to have core people, and I think this is why I was having that conversation before. I want to find out where people are at, I mean, if this is what you want to do, not do what would make it better, that type of thing. So we can make informed decisions together. So.
Right, exactly.
Can I just make a quick suggestion of something really concrete our group could do? I was thinking after that community conversation last week, and then we had a public comment to the same effect. It would be really helpful for us to have a glossary of terms.
Oh,
Because I feel like there were a lot of questions last week that were just, well, what do you mean by X, Y, or Z? And even when you brought up CRT, well, CRT might mean critical race theory, or it might mean culturally relevant teaching. And one of the people last week said, well, you haven't even talked about this thing, which I'm like, well, yeah, that's because that's a thing that's being talked about in the media, but it's not actually being talked about here. So I wonder if we might have like a subcommittee that would just make a glossary of terms. Like,
Yeah.
here's what we mean by diversity. Here's what CRT.
I think that's awesome. And, I think maybe what we could do is actually maybe put that on our page, right? We just, if, obviously the main ones. I was just thinking about it as well. So I was talking to Todd Schmidt, the village administrator. He wants to actually come in and talk because he wants to connect with our committee too and see how we can all work together, which to me, we should be working together with the village anyway, which obviously with the book study, when that went through. So it's just like, that was a great collaboration, but we need to be doing more of those things as much as we can. So I think there's a lot of things going on. I think we just got to kind of put those pieces together. I do love the ideas, and I think we need to continue to do that. And then when we set goals, we need to meet those goals.
Yeah.
And then again, if we are going to submit any types of reports, we need to explain those reports large read those reports, not just.
So would it be possible to get a subcommittee
Yeah.
going to do that either like before this next committee meeting or like immediately after? Because I just don't want to have the stuff go out to the community like, oh, they think we need to work on cultural competence, but then people don't know what that means and false information
So
gets out.
to answer your question, yes, what I would probably do is just put that on the agenda so we can talk about it. The other thing is that I also don't want to be controlled by, okay, this week I want our committee to be talking about this. I mean, from the community, right? Like, we also have to have that balance, right? Like, it's not, there's a lot of things we're trying to do and we want to like help everybody and address a lot of things, but sometimes we don't have the bandwidth at that point to do that. That doesn't mean we won't eventually do it. So we just have to kind of be careful about like that type of stuff, like when things pop up. But yes, I think if you want, what you should do is just put on the agenda, let's come up with a subcommittee. I'll read it, we'll do it, we'll come up with a subcommittee, and that's it.
Well, we talked about that probably at one of our first meetings, maybe first or second meeting we discussed, if we can go back and look at the minutes, shared language.
Yeah.
Shared language, and I think that is so important for number one, the committee to have, and then of course, sharing it out to the larger community.
Actually, to tell you the truth, I think I remember that. So we might not even have to come up with a subcommittee to do that. If someone just wants to do it and
Well,
come up with the terminology, because
yeah,
I think we
they
did
have
in
it
the beginning, we spoke about that.
Yeah, we did.
And I think we all agreed that's what we wanted to do. So the vote was
One of
already
the,
in.
yeah,
So I don't think
as
we
a
need to go
starting
that
point
process.
for this group, as a starting point, but I think that there's value in having more than one perspective at the table.
Yeah.
More so than having someone just come up with the list, but having about maybe 3 individuals with different perspectives and saying, hey, listen, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I think should benefit from being defined or get an understanding. So I think that would certainly help. But something else to kind of, as we talk about the scorecard, as we talk about the results of the data.
Yep.
Okay, I do think that this equity assessment will drive this group. I do think so. And the reason why I say that is because there are various elements that has come out of this that are critical to the schools and to our community. The reason why I say that, number one, we talked about it today, policy. This is a group that could probably recommend changes to policy. We talked about policy today. That's a very good example of how we can update policy. The word color was on policy. Seriously? We need to start thinking about the language being sensitive to how words are written, how they're described. It's things like that that this committee can be of great value. Policy is not only critical to the schools, but also to our community. It's also to our community. And when we put things in writing like that, we want to make sure that it's relevant to the work that we're doing today. So I think that this whole process that we've done the past 6 months does have value. I understand how many folks that was on the committee didn't quite understand and this wasn't what they were looking for, but there's going to be a significant amount of value and benefit that comes from this.
Totally agree. So yes, but, and other people, I just want to make sure that everybody also understands how committees work too, right? In terms of us being an ad hoc committee, and the things that we have to do, not say, and how we do it as public minutes and
Yep,
stuff. So
absolutely.
if you're not familiar with that, either ask or find, place where people can see how committees work.
Well, we're a school district committee, so we are supposed to follow Robert's Rules of Order, and we follow Robert's rules better than village does, for example, but we're not hyper formal.
Yeah, and I think to be fair, some of that stuff to get away the forum, right? Like obviously they follow, but we want to kind of get that away. So, but just so you're familiar, so people understand, we're not just doing things just to do things. We're not just sitting in a room eating food.
But yeah, exactly.
Right.
And oftentimes it's dictated by the board of education as well, by the school district as well. So we're sort of held to what's to be expected through them. So of course, if they follow Robert's rules, then obviously,
Well,
we
but
would be
that was the
expected as well.
conversation I was talking to Joe about this. So,
Okay,
you know,
So I guess to sort of try to put a brief capstone on it. The way that the committee structure works and the board structure works is that the chair effectively sets the agenda. And go ahead and look at who is chairing specific committees for the Board of Education, and you'll know why certain things are on specific committees. And then know that the board, through the president, set those chairs for those committees.
Mhm.
So if you want to know why something's not discussed in policy, look at the committee. If you want to know why something is or is not discussed in facilities or somewhere else, look at the committee. And at the board level, those are board decisions. And I mean, I'll just be totally honest, this, I appreciate Monique holding up that form for the ad hoc committee thing, because that's something that I drafted entirely on my own almost a year and a half, 2 years ago.
yeah.
And I've told Joel this before, the only reason I pushed for the formation of this committee was I pushed for it while he was running for election against Joe. Because I knew that originally when I started talking about this in 2018, the votes weren't there to make this committee. But I knew that there would be 4 votes when Joan was running against the man sitting next to me.
Mhm.
And once we actually pushed for it, it was unanimous. There was no dissension, no discussion, no additions really made to that other than what Randy had given me, and Tim had some insights. And I asked every single director head within the school district if they had any input or other things that they wanted to add to it, and there was really nothing. So this certainly didn't go the way I expected it to, because this was basically put in final format around February and March of last year, which right before COVID turned the world upside down.
So you're now off the board. How many board members are serving on this committee now?
Dave is apparently on it.
There should be 2, but I
There
think
should be
only
2,
one is-
correct?
It calls for 2 BOE.
Yes, that's what I
And
thought.
Dave is on, I'm not sure who the
Dave
second
is
one
on.
is.
and I-
Okay, so we need to figure out who's going to be number 2 from the board of,
Well, the
yeah.
board is the one that
The
decides that. They don't.
Well, I don't mean that we figure out, but we need to make sure that we need to know, like it shouldn't
Is it
be.
not
I think the bigger thing though, is not even that. I think the bigger thing is that we don't want a time limit on this committee,
Oh,
right?
I know,
Well,
I never
there's
said
no-
anything
this
about a
is not
time
open.
limit.
This is not open.
Yeah.
If the board could say, well, you know, you made this, we're glad we heard what you said, now DEI is gone.
Oh, well, I wasn't going there. I'm sorry.
No,
I was just
I'm
saying,
not, I'm not saying you're going there, but what
Oh.
I'm saying is that this committee should just be something that continues to happen.
And the way it was
That's what
worded, I arbitrarily put 12 to 18 months recommendation. That seems like enough time, right?
Put the
Yeah.
time, yeah.
Not knowing that we'd have a pandemic, that means our next 15 meetings are by Zoom, which are, I will just say, much less efficient.
right.
So, and I didn't even know what an audit was when I drafted that. So the fact that we've been doing that for half of the time,
Right.
you know, threw the timeline out of whack. So it'll change.
It will. I think it's all positive. I don't want to say it's not. I think we're all working together. I think, you know, even talking with Joan, like, I think we're all in the same direction. I think it's like, we just need to kind of tweak things and we should be okay. That's my take.
I mean, it's ultimately a decision of the board,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think, you know,
So is the board considering dismantling this?
so.
There are people on it who suggested that.
Okay.
The original
Okay.
vote, the
Sure.
original construction.
We
of the
still in, this
committee-
is still a public meeting, right? Okay.
The original construction of, and Mike can speak to this, but I mean, the original construction of the
Making sure.
committee
My mic is
was
still.
with this membership, with a charge for 12 to 18 months. So the committee itself was not initially constructed as perpetual, it was for a limited duration.
Sure,
Now,
absolutely.
you know, we completed an audit. We have lots of areas that I think in the audit invite further attention.
Exactly.
So somebody's going to have to do that. You know, as a member of the committee, I think this committee, and the board is going to have to kind of look at updating the membership of the committee. But I
Yep.
think this, it seems logical to me as an individual committee person, separating myself from, you know, my appointment, is it makes sense for this committee to help advance whatever the board wants to do coming out of the audit. But the board's gonna have to have some decision.
But the audit is just one piece though.
It
Like
is,
that audit,
right,
that audit is not
exactly.
thorough in terms of like, it's addressing every issue. I mean, I think, yes, we gotta have the audit, but again, there's so many other things that's why we need to continue, because there's so many things that we have not even spoken about that we need to start addressing. So again, but anyway, we'll do that next meeting, but just please get your ideas in by Friday.
Yeah,
Friday,
Friday.
so then Rebecca has that. and we can, talk about it.
Sounds good.
Motion adjourned.
Oh, yeah, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. take care.
All right.
Do the great Waunakee thing.
So good to see you. Absolutely. So